Good to go? All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is the October 21st, 2021 regular meeting of the Marysville Board of Education. We previously called it to order and had an executive session. And so at this point, we are to the Pledge of Allegiance, part of our agenda. So if everybody would stand up and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next up, we are ready for a COVID update, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Orsina here. Thank you so much for coming at last. Yep, sorry, we forgot the motion to approve the agenda. Sorry, I just missed a line there. So first I would accept a motion to approve our agenda. Motion by Ms. Powers.
Second.
Second by Mr. Smith. Roll call.
Ms. Powers? Yes. Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Luke? Yes. Ms. Savage? Yes. Ms. Devine?
Yes, motion carries. Now we're ready for you, Dr. Orsina. Thank you again for taking the time to come out here and I guess just kind of be available in case board members have questions, or if you'd like to start with a little overview, I guess, of what's happening in our county. And
yeah, if you would like, I'll just start with an overview of where we're seeing cases and what the overall impression of COVID pandemic looks like in Ohio, at least central Ohio. So I reported to our Board of Health yesterday on our cases. As you know, the surge began a lot earlier this year than it did last year. In fact, what we saw is almost a 2-month earlier start to the current surge that we've been dealing with now for several weeks. It began really gained steam in early September, and through September into early October, we had plateaued at the highest point about 500 cases per 100,000, which is much less than what we hit as our plateau and the highest peak last year, but still well above what's considered high community transmission, which is 100 per 100,000. So we were at that peak for about 5 solid weeks, and now seem to have been a stable decrease for the last couple of weeks. So we are actually now quickly going down in case counts over the last 2 weeks. We're down even from Tuesday of this week to Thursday. Tuesday we were about 245 cases per 100,000. We're down to 200, and I think I checked it earlier, 230-ish cases per 100,000. So even in a couple of days, we're seeing these declines. And that's even, again, from a couple of weeks ago where we're between 400 and 500, we're seeing a pretty sharp decline over the last 2 weeks. So things are moving in the right direction. Now, it's always worth mentioning that hospitalizations have not declined yet. If you look at the central region, which is what we typically make our comparisons to, hospitalizations are still very high. They are moving in the right direction globally across all hospital systems when taken as a whole. Individual hospital systems are still strained with COVID cases, but that also seems to be moving. It is a lagging indicator, so it's not a surprise that we're still seeing COVID cases being hospitalized because we're dealing with folks that became ill, were ill at home, and then transported to the hospital later on in their illness. So it takes a little while for those numbers to begin to decline, but they are also going down. I just looked at the data again. From 8 weeks ago, we were still very high increase in hospitalizations, but from 1 week ago and 4 weeks ago, we've had a very sharp decline in hospitalizations. So the 8 weeks ago takes us just before the surge began. So we have a sharp increase, and you've probably seen reports of this on the news, but we are beginning to trend in the right direction. And that's not speaking to any specific hospital system, so I'm not talking about Memorial specifically or Ohio Health. I'm talking about Central Ohio hospitals in general are moving in the right direction. So everything we're seeing so far says we are probably on the backside of this surge. What remains to be seen is whether or not, when we go through the holiday period, if we'll see an increase again. And that, at this time, we really can't predict. We may see a little bump, and that's certainly going to be our expectation. We will have some increase in cases just from travel and holiday-associated activities bringing folks together. But if we follow the pattern we had last year, hopefully this surge is truly on its way down, and we won't see a sharp increase like we did at the beginning of September.
I guess the other question I have is, a lot of our decisions have been based on the quarantine guidelines. So Do you have any comments about, or do you anticipate any changes in quarantine guidelines? I mean, I know some other districts have been doing some things in surrounding counties. And so just kind of wanted your thoughts on that.
Sure. I absolutely believe there's going to be a change in quarantine guidance. The question is, when is it going to come? This is an issue that my colleagues and I have been working with the state for a number of weeks to try to make some reasonable approaches and changes to that guidance, knowing that we're moving from what has been this very urgent crisis operations into a more steady and stable sort of outbreak investigation and response mode. So people hear the term endemic. We're not there yet, but we are moving in that direction. And so how do we begin to modify our approach for quarantine, isolation, and everything that goes with it as we move into more of an endemic phase of the disease, knowing that vaccines are going to be approved for 5 to 11. So vaccines by the end of November will be readily available for those who want the vaccine, and therapeutics are improving. So those two factors combined really change a lot of what our expectation is for outbreaks moving forward. So that change in quarantine and isolation guidance is coming. I cannot give you a firm answer as to when that will occur. That is wholly at the decision of the State Director of Health at this time. But yes, I think there will be modifications in the near future.
I had a question regarding our vaccination rate within the Union County area.
Sure. As to a specific subset, age, student population, or overall, or?
Let's start with overall, and we'll move down to the student rate.
Well, I didn't bring my bifocal, so I have to look a little funny trying to read this in the dim light. Overall rate for the county is about 66% as of this report, which is reported earlier in the week. That includes all areas of the county. What we do know is that the northern part of the county has a lower vaccination rate overall, and then the southern part of the county has a higher vaccination rate. The highest vaccination area is really as we go down the southeastern corridor towards Columbus, Dublin area, with Marysville being a close second. That sort of broad speaking, Marysville metro area being the next second highest rate. When we look at that in a subcategory, age really creates a direct correlation with vaccine uptake. So the older population groups have a much higher vaccine uptake. It drops off pretty quickly below 50. But again, even if I look in the northern part of the county where overall vaccination rates are low, vaccine uptake for the highest age groups is still very good, and then drops off more sharply than it does in the southern part of the county. When I look at the student population that are eligible, not total student population, but eligible population, that 12 to 19-year-old bracket, we have about 50% countywide are vaccinated at this time, so it's actually fairly good. Not sure what the uptake will be if they ultimately approve a 5 to 11 vaccine, but probably something comparable to what we've already seen.
I guess the last question is just what kind of impact have you seen the virus have on younger kids, health-wise, I guess? You know, have you seen any severe illness or any changes between the original COVID and the Delta variant?
As of right now, we don't really see a distinction between the outcome in terms of Delta and the original virus, in terms of severity, I should say. What we do see is the impact of the disease upon initial infection can be much faster in the Delta variant than the original. So particularly with children, if they're going to become symptomatic, they are more likely to become symptomatic in the first couple of days. And that's true for adults as well. Whereas the original virus, we often had people that went past the midway point of their isolation period before they really started to display symptoms. And the severity of symptoms sometimes came much later. So even if you had the illness and mild symptoms, with the original strain, you could be on day 7 or day 8 before you felt really awful if you're going to get that more moderate form of the disease. With the Delta variant, that seems to take place earlier in many of the cases. So the chance of a child being asymptomatic seems to be reduced by comparison. Now, the overall infection rate is about the same, or appears to be about the same. It's a little hard during the middle of the surge, because this short surge has been so truncated compared to the last one, to know what our final numbers will look like in terms of severity. What we have seen with the adult population, not so much with children, is that largely because of vaccine status. We have seen the age of hospitalization decrease pretty significantly. And there are lots of factors that play into it, but we have seen that pretty consistently through the entire surge. So whereas our typical hospitalization on the first surge, last year's surge from really October through February, it was often older individuals. And if you look at the data that's readily available on CDC, you see a lot of spiking that occurred as the virus made its way through nursing homes. Well, because of high vaccination rates and a variety of other factors, the nursing homes are not seeing those sorts of outbreaks like we did before, which means a lot of our hospitalizations are among this younger population that has a lower vaccine uptake. And that's been pretty consistent through most of the surge. So a lot of what we've been seeing has been that. Children represent a larger portion of our hospitalizations this go around than it did last time, but as of right now, we haven't had a report of, during this surge, of a child that was hospitalized that's a Union County resident. And my only caution with that is the process to get hospitalizations reported back on cases lags pretty significantly during this current surge. And so I can't say definitively that we haven't had one, but I can say we have not had one reported. And that is entirely feasible. We've had over 500 student cases since July 1st, which is last year during the entire first sort of year of the pandemic, the school year, July 1 of last year through June 30th of last year, we had about 1,000 school-age cases, and we've had 500 in just those couple of months where school's been active. I think our total, we had about 60 between July 1 and the start of school, and then 500-ish after the start of school. So it's been pretty significant in terms of cases, but not hospitalizations for youth at this point.
Any other questions? Oh, Ryan?
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Orsina. So what's your recommendation for, your department's recommendation for masking in the schools at this point for face masks?
Sure. So when we answer this question for other organizations, it's really the same. You know, whether it's American Academy of Pediatrics or whether it's the CDC or ODH, as long as we have high community transmission, we encourage universal masking. And that's true of any organization. Now, whether an individual organization chooses to do it, that has to be a decision of that organization, ultimately based on what they feel is in the best interest to mitigate risk for their community. And I don't say that lightly, but it is the recognition that risk tolerance is different for every population we deal with. And what's good for one school may not be the best approach for another school. What's good for one business may not be the best approach for another business. And so that decision ultimately falls to the leaders of that organization. Our stance continues to be, as long as we have high community transmission, we encourage universal masking. It is an effective risk mitigation procedure. Now, the best one, of course, is vaccination, followed by masking, followed by social distancing. And so we encourage any of those while we're at high community transmission, and we remain at high community transmission at the moment. Will that last much longer? If we continue on the trend we're at, we're a few weeks out from being back below that threshold for high community transmission. And at that time, we would readjust, just like we did back in the summer when we began encouraging it again because transmission rates went up. We'll again say, evaluate your risk and make those decisions based on your own personal risk tolerance for what you want to do and how you want to protect yourself.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk to us and answer questions and everything. Appreciate everything you're doing in our county, so.
Well, you're very welcome. And if I can, Madam President, just one comment for the
Sure.
staff of the Marysville School District. All the ones that are interfacing with our staff have done a remarkable job. It's been a very hard ask for the schools, not just Marysville, but all of our districts. And the staff have been absolutely wonderful to work with and have worked so very hard with us on this project. So I really want to thank them and the leadership for allowing that to occur. It's been remarkable.
Well, thank you, and I know it's a real team effort, and you know, it's nice to work with a team where you feel respect on both ends, and we know how hard you're working and how limited your resources are as well. So, thank you very much. Thanks for the kind words about our staff. I don't think we're surprised to hear that, but it's always nice to hear. Thank you. All right.
Okay, we should have a presentation, James. All right, so tonight we wanted to go ahead and give you an update for our experience thus far and really talk to you. As you know, we did a parent survey last week and give you the results and talk through some of those nuances with you, and as well provide you with recommendations moving forward. As you know, we currently have a required mask recommendation until Monday, so we want to revisit that and make recommendations for moving forward. We continue our goal to keep students in school 5 days a week for in-person instruction, and as we move through the survey, it's great to see that our parents are definitely aligned with that goal. I know Mark's going to talk a little bit about that. And actually, we have a significant amount of data that Mark is going to share and talk through with you. So I'll turn it over to Mark at this time.
Thank you, Diane. You might have seen this slide before. I'm just trying to provide an update on some of the information. I've showed at historic Board of Education meetings. On this particular table, we're looking at 3 pockets of time. One pocket of time, which is the very top part of our table, was our total COVID experience for the 2020-21 school year. Beneath that, in the middle, was our COVID experience from the staggered start on the 18th of August through September 2nd, right before we implemented the mask requirement. And then the last table at the very, very bottom is our COVID experience since instituting the mask requirement. And in that pocket of time since September 3rd, we've had 166 student cases, 419 standard quarantines, which would be an out-of-school quarantine, and then 566 modified quarantines for a grand total of 1,151, COVID-related events for our students. On the staff side, we've had 25 cases in that window of time, 9 standard quarantines, and 33 modified quarantines, which are the return to work, return to school quarantine for a grand total of 67. And in that same pocket of time, we've had 23 close contacts or individuals that are in quarantine turn into subsequent cases in that period of time. Slide, please. I also wanted to provide an update on our dashboard reporting system. So this is current as of 4 o'clock this afternoon. And what you'll notice is if you look up in the very top left where our current experience is, we have a very, very low COVID-19 related experience for Marysville schools at this time. And when we look at the individual department and building indicators down below, our departments have no COVID-19 experience at all, whether that's cases or quarantines. Marysville, or is that, I can't read that. What's the one in the middle at the very bottom? I'm struggling to see. MHS, there we go. I can't really see it. Marysville High School currently has no cases or quarantines as of the publishing of this dashboard system in the last 7 days. And then we have very low COVID-19 experience or impact across the other buildings, so they're all green at this time. What I would recommend to update this system, though, would be removing the modified quarantines from the building and district counts. So when you hover over those green bubbles or hover over the current score, indicators, it gives you a breakout on cases, standard quarantines, and modified quarantines. I would recommend removing those modified quarantines from those indicators, as well as the rate that is published on this dashboard reporting system. So when we look at Edgewood and it says 0.2%, COVID-19 impact, that includes modified quarantines at this time. And if we really want to accurately measure the COVID-19 situation at Marysville schools, I would recommend removing the modified quarantines to focus on the impact from cases and standard out-of-school quarantine. So, how many individuals in a building in the last 7 days are out of that building as a result of COVID-19. I would also recommend to begin reporting a 7-day rolling case rate, which I will talk about momentarily. That includes historical data throughout, through the beginning of the school year, and reporting that alongside our cumulative COVID data table. So currently if you go to the COVID-19 reporting page of the Marysville Schools website. We have our scorecard up top, and then underneath of that, there is a table with our cumulative experience. I would recommend placing that 7-day rolling case rate, which is aligned to the CDC criteria for spread and transmission within school systems, to also be reported alongside that data as well. Yes.
The removing the modified quarantines, those students are under modified quarantine, they're attending school.
That is correct.
And so the focus would then be on those that were actually outside of school.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. As always, I try to provide an update on the 2 zip codes that encompass the Marysville Exempted Village School District, the 43040 and 43067 zip codes. I've also included some previous points of data from other points in time from those exact same zip codes, and consistent with what was just shared by Dr. Jason Orsina, as we are seeing throughout our zip codes a decline over time in the COVID-19 case rate per 100,000 individuals in those zip codes. Slide, please. As always, I try to do an update on the water reclamation data, which measures the gene copies of COVID-19 in our water, specifically our wastewater. And one thing that really 2 things I wanted to note is we've seen a significant decline in the last collection, which is from October 12th. Again, I'm trying to squint and read here. From October 12th, there's been a substantial decline in the COVID parts per million in our wastewater, which is also corresponded with the bottom part of this chart, which that black line tracks the case counts in the water reclamation region, and you've seen a pretty significant decline there as well. And what I want you to kind of keep in mind is that M shape on the bottom chart that tracks our cases, because when we go over into this next slide, our internal data from Marysville Schools walks and talks with what that shape looks like.
Mark, is that top one, I can't quite see it either. Whose water is being collected? Is it Union County or what?
It's the Marysville Water Reclamation Facility.
So it's Marysville, all right.
Yes, which extends all the way down almost to Dublin. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the rolling 7-day case rate per 100,000 persons chart that I referenced when talking about updates to the dashboard and reporting system. I do want to point out that the 7-day rolling case rate is what the CDC has recommended schools utilize to ascertain their level of transmission within their spaces and places. And they have 4 sets of criteria, or 4 indicators for transmission tied to that 7-day rolling case rate. High transmission, substantial transmission, moderate transmission, and low transmission. And I also have on this chart when the district mask mandate or requirement was put into place, so you can see from that moment forward into time what the case rate has looked like for Marysville Exempted Village School District. And this case rate encompasses students and staff as part of a total population for the school district. So this is COVID-19 cases within our boundaries, so to speak, or within our walls for our particular school buildings, et cetera, departments, et cetera. And what I wanted to point out is if you go all the way to the right, that is our 7-day case rate as of today. It's 42.3 per 100,000 individuals, which places us in a moderate transmission situation, and that is consistent with 2 other points in time, the very beginning of the school year. And what I have circled there all the way to the left was the 23rd of August. So I tried to find comparable points in time with where we're at right now. And then at the kind of the bottom point, back almost 2 months ago to when we, just after implementing the mask requirement. So we're in a very moderate transmission situation, and it is consistent with where we were at the beginning of the school year, is what I wanted to point out. And again, this is the chart that I would recommend publishing alongside our cumulative table with all of our cases, quarantines, et cetera. As always, I try to do an update on just the longitudinal or our experience over time. And again, I've highlighted that when we've implemented a district mask mandate, and there's 3 different colors on this area chart, technically 4 if you want to count the red line, but at the very, very bottom, you'll see dark blue. Those have been our daily cases over time within Marysville schools. The second, or the step up from that, the middle blue, the slightly lighter blue, those are our standard quarantines. So if you look back at near the beginning of the school year, we had a very large mountain of standard quarantines before implementing the district mask requirement. And then right above that, we have the lightest blue, or the peaks of those mountains, so to speak, and those are our modified quarantines over time. And then that red line tracks the cumulative Marysville schools COVID experience on a 7-day rolling total. So as you can see, like over time, we've had some very large peaks in that experience. And that includes modified quarantines, but as of recently, we're right where we were right back at the beginning of the school year. So we have multiple sources of information that are walking and talking together, indicating that we are roughly where we were when we started the school year at this time.
Okay, if you could put that one back up. So if we look at students out of school, that would be the darkest blue and the darker blue.
Yep, the next step up, yes.
And so that second spike that goes up, it looks like most of those were modified quarantines.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then just to provide a quick update on our cumulative experiences. So this is from beginning of reporting this school year to date. We've had 249 student cases, 910 standard quarantines, and 779 students in modified quarantine since the beginning of the school year. On the staff side, we've had 34 cases, 19 standard quarantines, and it looks like 58 modified quarantines. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing all the way over there. So we have a grand total of 2,049 COVID-related incidents in Marysville Exempted Village School District. Slide, please. And I always try to provide an update on our active cases and quarantines. So these are the out-of-school out-of-school quarantine, sorry, I'm a little distracted, out-of-school quarantines as well as cases that result in isolation. And these are individuals that have yet to complete their quarantine period or their isolation period. And we have 59 of those incidents or situations right now in Marysville schools. And just a few weeks ago, we had 113 of those. Right, so we've started to see a very significant decline just in the last couple of weeks on those active cases and quarantines as our experience changes. And given all this information, I was very, very curious what our current student absenteeism rate looked like relative to years past. Were we, and I was just wondering, are we in a spot, in a place that is significantly elevated student absence-wise with the presence of COVID within the district than what we've experienced in previous years? And so I looked at 3 particular points in time. So I used yesterday as my benchmark for this school year, so the 20th of October of 2021. And then I wanted to look at a non-COVID school year. So I looked at October 22 of 2019, which is at roughly the same place within the school year as the 20th of yesterday. And then we needed to look at 2 points in time, an A day or a red day and a blue day, since we were on hybrid schedule last year, to total up the student absences within the hybrid model at an also roughly equivalent point in time, like we're talking just within a few days. And what's interesting is that the current number of student absences, COVID, doctor's appointments, I missed the school bus, et cetera, that number of student absences is almost exactly equivalent to where we were at in 2019 at a roughly equivalent point in time. So COVID or no COVID, we're very similar to where we have been student absenteeism-wise in this district to where we've been historically. And that ends up correlating to or being roughly a 6% daily student absenteeism rate across the district. Okay. Any questions before I go on to the survey?
Thanks. That's a lot of really good information. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I also wanted to provide a summary of the findings from the survey that was completed by parents and caregivers in Marysville School District. Our survey ran from October 13th through the 18th, and it was available to 3,388 households in Marysville schools, and those 3,388 households represent 5,370 students at the time of the release of the survey. In reality, we had 1,236 households complete the survey for a 36.5% response rate, which the typical response rate on surveys in the United States is 30%. So we're actually above that average, which is good. Oh, can't see. Let me see if I can, okay. Can we go back? Oh, forward just one. There we go, thank you. And when we look at the rate of students that were represented by all of those families relative to the student population, 37.1% of our student population were represented by those responses. In order to have or in terms of what we wanted in terms of minimum sample size, in order to say that we have 95% confidence in a plus or minus 5% margin of error, right? So if I surveyed everybody in the population, all 3,388 households, I could have 95% confidence that we would be plus or minus 5% with all of those people. We needed a minimum of 346 households. So we kind of blew right past our absolutely minimum sample size, and given the size of the sample that we did collect as part of the survey, we get that 36.5% response rate. Our margin of error was whittled down to 2.22%, and we can have 95% confidence that if I surveyed every single household in Marysville schools, the responses on our survey would be plus or minus 2.22% across the board. So pretty small margin of error, which is great. In terms of the items that we asked, there were 7 items overall that we surveyed parents on. Number 1 was the priority of maintaining a 5-day per week in-person learning model. The second was the effectiveness of the Marysville Schools plan to require masks relative to the goal of maintaining a 5-day per week in-person learning model. And then the favorability of 5 different return models or mitigation models, if you will. Everything from maintaining the current K-12 mask requirement to having a K-6 mask requirement and masking being optional in 7-12. Masking being optional in K-12 with a mask to return strategy. The same as above, but also adding a testing strategy to that option, and then the favorability of having masking being optional and utilizing our dashboard to drive decisions. So those were the 7 items that we surveyed parents on. If you go to the next slide, please. And these are our findings. And some of the numbers might be a little difficult to read. I'm actually going to go into detail in a summary after this. But just, almost 90% of our parents indicated that, being in school 5 days per week for in-person learning, was a moderately high to very high priority for them. Just over 60% indicated that the Marysville plan to require masking was effective in maintaining a 5-day per week in-person learning model. And then just over 55% of responses indicated that their number one or their most favorable model was continuing the current K-12 mask requirement. That was followed up by having a K-12 masking be optional with a mask to return strategy, followed by the same thing but with a testing strategy, followed by using the dashboard metrics, and then it was more or less universally unfavorable to have a K-6 masking requirement with 7-12 being optional. Slide, please. So to get into the summary here and some of the finite numbers. So 89.2% of our respondents or households indicated the importance of a 5-day per week in-person learning model. That was 1,102 households responded that way. 62.1% indicated that the Marysville requirement to wear masks in K-12 relative to our goal of 5 days per week of in-person learning was moderately high to very highly effective. That was 768 households. The most favored strategy was maintaining the current K through 12 mask requirement. That was 55.2% of households, and that was 682 households. And then the next most favored approach was having K through 12 masking be optional and then implementing a mask to return strategy. That was 48.3% of respondents, with it being 597 households overall. So that's kind of the overall findings. Now, I thought it was, if we go to the next slide, please. I thought it was also important to look at what your next most preferred or what your preferential options were, depending upon how you responded on the number one most preferred item. So if you had favorability that was moderate to very high with regard to continuing the K through 12 mask requirement, I was curious what your next best option was, right? Your next most preferred or next most favorable option was. And when we look at that, it is making masking optional in K through 12 with a mask return strategy and a testing strategy attached to that. And conversely, if we could advance the slide, please. I was curious if you had moderate to very high unfavorability of continuing the K through 12 mask requirement. What was your most preferred choice? And it was having masking be optional in K through 12 with a mask to return requirement. So I thought it was, and that was followed up by using the dashboard metrics. So I thought it was very important to kind of look at this through a number of different lenses to see what was preferred across different groups of individuals that responded to the survey.
So, Mark, I think I know what mask to return is and testing strategy is, but could you
Elaborate?
Could you say explicitly what it is?
Yes. So or do you want to do it? Yeah, that'd be fine.
So right now, there are several school districts doing pilots. Licking County, Delaware County, Knox County actually all just went to a mask to return strategy. And then Morrow County, I believe, all of a sudden I forgot the county, that is doing a testing strategy, a test to stay strategy. So students are tested. Once they're identified as close contact, as long as they remain asymptomatic and negative, they're able to stay. So some of those pilots are existing. That's why we included those in there. The mask to stay strategy would be if you were listed as a close contact, you would go into a mask and stay in a mask for 14 days, but there's really no quarantines unless you're someone who wouldn't wear a mask or had a reason that you couldn't wear a mask, then there would be a quarantine associated with that. So those pilots are going on as well.
Just one clarification, if with that mask to return, they would wear the mask unless they started developing symptoms.
Correct, you
And
have
at
to
that
stay
point,
in all of
yeah.
those equations, you have to
Right.
stay asymptomatic and wear your mask.
So it's not masking when you're returning from quarantine,
It's masking instead and staying in school instead of a quarantine.
so they're never sent home, they're just
Correct,
tested and put in a mask?
correct.
Okay.
Depending on the strategy. If it's just mask to stay, there's no testing.
Is that essentially doing away with the distance? Because currently, outside six feet, the inside 6 feet, inside 3 feet is characteristic of the quarantine guidelines.
So you're still identified as a close contact the same way. But you, instead of being modified quarantine or if you're in that 0 to 3, being a standard quarantine, you're put in a mask for the next 14 days.
So to summarize, of those households and respondents that reported moderately high to very high levels of favorability towards maintaining the K through 12 mask requirement, the next most favorable approach was the implementation of optional masking with a mask to return strategy and a testing strategy. And that was 47.7% of respondents of the people that, again, that households that favored continuing the mask requirement responded that way. So it was, 325 households went that direction. And then of the respondents that reported moderately high to very high unfavorability towards maintaining the K through 12 mask requirement, the next most favorable approach was the implementation of optional masking in K-12 with a mask to return strategy. And 62.7% of those households responded that way, and that was 288 households. And then I also thought it was important to also articulate 5.7% of respondents reported moderately high to very high unfavorability towards all presented approaches and models, and that was represented by 71 households. I also wanted to look to see if there were any individual differences or disparities between buildings and grade levels. And so we're going to kind of advance through these about every 5 seconds or so, and then I'm going to do a summary at the end. But what I will say is there were no grave discrepancies between grade levels. There was mostly consistency between grade levels, but there were some individual differences in how buildings responded or families responded within, that had students in particular buildings. And then I will talk about those in a summary at the end of these images. So we could just keep. And we did these breakdowns for each individual item on the survey. So we were able to go item by item, grade level by grade level, school building by school building, to see how folks responded on the survey. Okay, if we could, thank you. Advance the slide, please. So like I just mentioned, there were a number of similarities amongst grade levels. The one trend I would note is that families with older students in grades 7 through 12 did have a tendency to favor the K through 6 mask requirement and masking being optional in 7 through 12. So that was one trend that emerged out of that. But when we look at the individual buildings, continuing the K through 12 mask requirement was most favorable among Northwood, Edgewood, and Creekview families. Having masking be required in K through 6 but optional in 7 through 12 was the most favorable among MHS, ECHS, and BMS families, which would fit within that particular model. And with K through 12 masking being optional and using a master return strategy, that was the most favorable among Naven, Raymond, and ECHS families. And then that exact same set of strategies, but also adding a testing strategy, was the most favorable among Naven, Northwood, and Edgewood families. And then K through 12 masks being optional and then driving decisions with the dashboard metrics were the most favorable among Naven, Mill Valley, and Raymond families. Okay, and that is what I have for the survey.
So recommendations. So we have several items to consider. Thanks. First, I just reiterate that we have not had any changes to the quarantine guidelines from Ohio Department of Health or Union County. So as I mentioned, there are several counties doing mask to stay strategies. They do have endorsements from their local health department to do those pilots. We do not have that. We do anticipate, as Dr. Orsina mentioned, that the Ohio Department of Health is going to release guidelines or adjusted guidance, but we have not received that to date. Also, the mask requirement that we implemented was never really designed to stay in place for the entire school year. We committed to revisit, and it was designated or designed to just be a mitigation strategy for definitely that uptick with what we assume to be the Delta variant and the impact it was having on the the quarantine situation pretty quickly in our buildings. Guidelines remain highly recommend mask indoors from the Union County Health Department, and you heard that tonight. Our school experience at this point is very similar to the beginning of the year. So there are a lot of factors I think that we share with you tonight that shows we're kind of back to when we started the school year, or maybe just a couple days into the year. Our parent feedback is supportive of masks given the current guidelines. We also know that our community spread is decreasing, plateauing. Delta variant seems to be subsiding. Our task force group, who's met several times over the past month, definitely also expressed concerns really with the upcoming holiday and more questions just about travel and those types of things and how they might impact families and students returning to school. So it would be my recommendation to the board at this point, starting Monday, to make masking optional, but continue to highly recommend that students wear masks, similar to the guidance from our health department, and that we make operational decisions between the principal and superintendent. So if building impact gets to a point that we need to shut down, that the building principal and I would work on that plan, dependent on the absent level of the building. Quarantine guidelines have not changed, so I think that's really important to remember. I'll review that again in a second. Notification from families about a quarantine currently are now directly coming from the health department. We no longer contact families that they're a close contact. There's been some changes effective the middle of this month that really led to families sharing with us vaccination status, and that information should not be shared with us, and the health department will take all of those pieces now and contact families directly, and we've been in that for a couple of days, I guess since last Friday. Volunteers can work in the building. We would be open to bringing volunteers back. They would obviously have to do health checks, and if that building in particular would be under masking or something, or working in a classroom that was being masked or anything like that, we'd ask that they follow those requirements as well. Also, with the quarantine guidelines change, that I would go ahead and make any operational changes that need to happen to adapt and implement that new policy. We'd also recommend maintaining the dashboard for transparency and communication with the modifications that Mark shared earlier. I would also add probably one thing that should be on there that I neglected, but it's just a reminder more than anything, is that when it comes to transportation, that is a federal mandate, so that would not fall under this umbrella of my recommendation. I think that I want to hit again and remind again that the quarantine guidance has not changed. I think that at the beginning of the year, we were really committed to parents having a choice, and we're back in a similar data position as we were at that time. So I do also think that parents have recognized that the impact of the quarantine situation may be a little more now than before. So I want to remind people how important it is and what happens from the Department of Health. This is a very basic framework. I always share that from their slide deck, and there are multiple ways to test back into school, but this gives a rough reminder of how important it is if you are interested in staying at school under mask optional situation, that masking does allow students to stay in school longer. That does not change. So this slide we've shared a number of times, and it would still be in effect under the current health department guidelines. So again, just a reminder of those zones. If you are wearing a mask, it does permit you to be considered for that modified quarantine where you can still attend class and participate. So within 3 to 6 feet, you have that mask on, you're able to return to school as long as you don't show any symptoms. So just a nice reminder, again, to families that if the board were to accept my recommendation for masking optional, that this is still in effect. That does not erase the quarantine guidelines.
Okay, with that, I do want to note, just to remind everybody, we did add a section to our agenda this afternoon where we will have a chance to make a motion and vote on this recommendation. But obviously now, if you've got questions now, that's great, and we'll also have a chance for more questions and discussion when we get to that point in the agenda. So if there are any clarifying questions right now, please go ahead and feel free to ask.
So, Diane, you mentioned parents' choice, and I've heard that phrase around this masking issue before. What does that actually look like when a kid arrives at school? Like, are the parents communicating with? I know there's an exemption form if they want exempted under a mask mandate, but let's suppose we go to a mask optional, or let's say mask optional and strongly recommended. I think that's your recommendation. Like, do the kids show up at school with some, like, how do the teachers know what the parent's choice is or the parent's preference?
We do not ask that question. We certainly could have parents share with the classroom teacher that they want to make sure their child is in a mask. We have not asked that in particular. That would be an at-home conversation.
So we don't ask, but the parent is free to call the school or leave
Sure.
word with the teacher. Okay.
Yep. I think that was honestly one of the concerns of the task force, that put an additional burden on staff. So we'd want parents to be our partner in having that conversation with their child as well about their expectations.
Diane, our masking policy applies to the academic day and not to athletics and other extracurriculars, the after-school activities. What has our experience been in that area?
Complete opposite, really, compared to last year. If you remember last year, we really struggled with some of our athletic and extracurricular groups spreading, and COVID too, not even necessarily at events. That has been minimal. Coaches have put different structures in place. For example, the volleyball team where practice was 6 feet during practice. Our football team's no longer using the locker room, so our coaches have made some great adaptations to prepare for that, and it's been minimal within those programs.
So
Now, if you're modified quarantine, I'm sorry to interrupt you, remember you can still participate. So if you wear your mask and you are able to be a modified quarantine, then you're also able to still participate in show choir and the choir and football and tennis.
So the task force feedback, what were their key concern items?
Well, I've told you every time we've met that our task force is definitely, 50-50. We have representation from all sides. So I would say there was concern with moving back, and that if we made it optional, even though 55% of our respondents said, let's keep them in mask, those 55% or people wouldn't do that. That in general, the masks would go by the wayside. So there was concern with that. There was definitely concern over the upcoming holidays, that last year Halloween was our uptick, and Halloween's just around the corner. So there was definite concerns in that regard. Were those the two big ones? I think those are the two big ones.
So
And kind of, it's not broke, don't fix it.
Okay.
You know, that things are going well, things are dropping off, let's wait a little bit longer.
Okay, and then my second question is, with the mask to return option, based on the fact that we have some families that don't want to mask, is there a kind of built-in bias against those families if we do go to a mask to return policy?
Well, a lot of things would have to happen before we went to a mask to return policy. We'd either have to have approval from Dr. Orsina or from the Ohio Department of Health would have to issue that. So if that were the case, we'd have to have conversations with those families. If they were unwilling to wear a mask, then they would have to do the quarantine if that's how the guidance read.
So I guess, I don't know, Sue, if this fits better here or if we have a proposal later, but one of my biggest questions, Diane, is like I listened to Dr. Orsina, and I have to say, I found it a little hard to parse his answer, because on the one hand, he said it's strongly recommended that we continue masking, and then he said every organization has to also take into account their own level of risk aversion. Okay, well, I know my level of risk aversion. I know my family's. To judge the districts as a whole, that's actually kind of tricky for me. But we do have this survey, and 55%, which was the biggest group preferring any particular approach, going into November, wanted to keep the masking mandate in our schools. So what was your reasoning in coming up with a recommendation to not do that? Because your recommendation is masking is optional starting on Monday. And we've got 55% of the survey respondents saying keep things the way they are.
I think a couple of things. I believe that our numbers and our community numbers have trended down, and I do believe we're in a position that was very similar to the beginning of the school year when we said masks were optional. I still recommend you wear a mask. If you want to avoid quarantine, we highly recommend you wear a mask. The difference would be, it's not a mandate to do so. And I think that our numbers are in a spot very similar to the beginning of the year, where we said, we want to make it optional, we want to make it parent choice. But I do think also maybe our parents are more informed. I think we all had a sense of hope that the summer was a great indicator of a new school year, and we got hit pretty quickly. So those would all be the factors into that. Everybody had some kind of interest in masks. That's why we have Mark go through and kind of look at that second choice. And so we kind of tried to look at where we cast the larger net, and not just the one single group of 55% that said that.
Okay. Well, I know, and I do think that just having gone through the experience, you see the number of cases, so I'm kind of curious how many families have been impacted, because I've had some personal experience in my family, and I know the strain of going through that quarantine and having to juggle jobs and things like that. And so I would guess that parents will look at this in a different way than they did back at the beginning of the school year. And,
I think too, when you look at that absent rate that
yes.
Mark went over, when you look at just COVID cases, I don't want any kids to be sick. Please don't mistake that. But our sickness rate, absence rate is pretty flat compared to any other year. And I think that's pretty important to think about too, as we learn how to adjust and move forward and through the rest of the school year.
And I do, another thing just to talk about is some of the, as part of your recommendation, it had the ability of you to work with the principals too, and make some adjustments if needed. So, you know, maybe that's something we talk about a little bit more when we get to that point, so. Any other questions right now? Okay. Let's see where we are in our agenda. Okay, we are to the Employee of the Month. So I would now accept a motion to approve Keith Bayless, custodian at Edgewood, as Employee of the Month for September 2021.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Smith, second by Ms. Savage. And now,
I'm
if you would
sorry,
like
Keith, do you want to
Yes.
come on up here? Normally, when we're in a school, you don't get this big stage, so here's your moment, right? All right, do you want to stand right here in front of everyone? Perfect. All right, it's my pleasure, Keith, to read why your peers nominated you for this award. All right? All right. If you don't know Keith, he is an enthusiastic, dedicated, and committed employee of Marysville Exempted Village School District. He is a custodian at Edgewood Elementary. And his peers say the following: Keith is willing to help out in any way he can. He has a great sense of humor and truly enjoys helping others. He goes above and beyond what is required of him as a custodian. Keith rocks. He comes to work every day with a great attitude and does everything that is asked of him. He is a problem solver who is solution-oriented and makes a difference in the lives of everybody here at Edgewood. He works so hard, and our building has never been this clean. He is also amazing with the students. He is gentle and kind and makes them feel safe. Keith treats everyone with kindness and respect. He works extremely hard and goes over and beyond to help the staff and kids. Keith goes above and beyond to ask what he can do to help individual staff members each and every day. He even volunteered to fix my personal laminator when it was broken recently. He builds relationships with staff and students and brings energy, a positive energy, to every single interaction. He truly makes a difference in our building. Thank you for everything you do, Keith.
Congratulations. And now, Keith, if you would stay up here just a second, I really kind of want to do a roll call to make it official, but we'll do that after. And if you just wait a second, because we're going to do a roll call and make it official, and then we can do another round of applause, okay? So how about a roll call, please?
Yes.
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 Yes, motion carries. It's official. Thank you again. All right, next we have public participation. Okay, we have one sign up. And so that's Mr. Jeff. Okay, Jeff, you know the routine. So Todd will keep track of the time for you, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, my name is Jefferson Lulin, and I'm a resident of Marysville, Ohio. Couple of things. Number one on my list is evaluation of risk. The good doctor said that the state health department made guidance that they passed on to the county health department. And then the county health department, rather than doing any mandates, passed the guidance on to you. And I'm wondering why you decided that you were going to enforce a mandate rather than passing the authority on down the chain to the parents. Now, I don't need an answer, and this isn't the time for answers, but that's a significant question. I was fascinated by the attendance, the student absences chart from 2019, 2020, and 2021. Even though we do have COVID, it seems like we have about the same amount of absences as we did when, well, pre-COVID in 19. I spoke with Jennifer Thrush at the Union County Health Department, and the reason I did that is I had heard from at least one mother that her daughter was quarantined by one of the school staff, and well, that didn't sit right with me, so I asked Jennifer Thrush with the health department, and she said that none of the faculty or staff of the schools has the authority to quarantine anybody. That's a health department call, and only a health department call. And I think that was addressed a little bit earlier as far as who actually calls it, if you will. So I appreciate that. Part two is CRT. I've been told over and over and heard from quite a few people that we don't teach CRT in Marysville schools. Well, it seems like there's a derivative of CRT called social emotional learning. And I think the principal from one of the schools here talked about that in the last meeting. And she was rather proud that we were moving into social emotional learning that has significant cues of CRT in it. So even though it's not CRT in its entirety, like maybe what's being taught at the college level or at Harvard or whatever, there are significant portions of that that are being taught in our elementary schools. So I guess my point there is that we need to be studying and be up on this so that we know when we see one of these elements, it's like, oh, red flag, that is CRT, even though they're calling it, by another name.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments, Jeff. All right, next up, we have a presentation from Mill Valley Elementary. Ms. Jones, thank you.
Good evening. I want to just say thank you to the board and to Diane for allowing me to serve as the principal of Mill Valley Elementary. I'm going to talk tonight just about a few of our building focuses this year and kind of what we're doing to tackle some of those areas. If you want to move to the next slide. So at the beginning of every school year, myself and my instructional coach talk about what we would like our building focuses to be. And for this year, we identified 3 different areas. The first area being our English Language Arts Framework. For kindergarten and through second grade, we're focusing more on our reading foundational skills. And with our third and fourth graders, we're looking at our vocabulary and comprehension. And those are encompassed in what we identify as the Keystone Standards, which I'm going to hit on here in a few slides. The next area of focus we had was in math. We based all of these decisions on a variety of data that we collected over last school year, just deciding what we needed to really hone in on. We know what good instruction looks like, and we know what works, and we know how to get results. And so these are how we kind of came up with our action items in terms of each of these areas of focus. So in math, we're looking at our mathematical practices and then number talks. And number talks is a way for students to apply their mathematical practices. And so that's just a strategy that we use. So we figured that would be an easy way to kind of tackle that area with our teachers. And so we're doing a lot of professional development around how to do number talks and what number talks look like and how we can incorporate those into the classroom. Again, those will be hit in my Keystone Standards that I'll identify later on in the presentation. And our last area of focus for us is data and assessment. One of the things that we decided to implement this year is through our teacher-based teams, a very kind of strategic implementation plan that we were going to use to kind of look at data and make instructional decisions for our classrooms. And then also identifying what our Keystone Standards were and what was going to be the foundation of what we wanted kids to leave each grade level knowing and being able to master. And then also, how are we going to progress monitor those students to know that they are, in fact, closing any gaps that they may have or that they're progressing through what we want them to learn and leave that grade level with. So it's really important for us at Mill Valley to make sure that any goals or building focus that we have is aligned to our district goals as well. And so one of the district goals that we have is student performance and learning. And so our teacher-based team implementation plan, our Keystone Standards, and our focus on assessment and data all are encompassed under that student performance and learning. So I'm going to delve into some of those areas that I just mentioned in terms of student performance and learning. The first thing I'm going to talk about is our new Tbt Implementation Plan that we've started this year, along with my instructional coach who's here tonight, Kathy Savage. If you don't know, TBTs are teacher-based teams. We meet with our teacher-based teams, which are, we have organized by grade level, which also includes our intervention specialist as well. And we meet with those teams bi-weekly. And we go through this cycle that I have on this slide. So what we do is we identify a critical need. And again, we base that information on data and assessment, things that we've collected, whether it be district vetted information or whether it be classroom data that teachers have collected. And we identify a critical need for that particular grade level. We then analyze and organize that data so that we have a better understanding of which students we need to extend their learning with, which students are maybe right where we want them to be, and which students maybe need some extra support. Then within that TBT team, we decide to collaborate and figure out, well, how are we going to come up with some evidence-based strategies within our instruction in order to increase that data or to improve that data. And then we have the teachers design an implementation plan. What are we going to do? How are we going to incorporate those strategies into the classroom and into our instruction? And then how are we going to assess students to know that those strategies are in fact working? Once we do that, we implement the plan, we go into the classroom, we use those strategies that we discussed, we progress monitor students, we come back together, we examine and analyze those results, and then make a decision on how we want to move forward. And so this is a plan that we've decided to do throughout this school year with whatever focus that we have. And the next slide is going to show you kind of how we've mapped out what the school year is going to look like in terms of our areas of focus. Now, obviously, those could change depending on what our data tells us. But as of right now, you'll notice that for September and October, our focus for our kindergarten and third grade teachers has been our open court, which is our new ELA framework and our new ELA curriculum. We looked at our letters data, and so if you don't know what letters is, it's language essentials for teaching reading and spelling. And so that's actually an assessment that we give students, particularly to kind of look at their phonics skills and decide, where do we need to take whole group instruction, where do we need to take small group instruction, and what kind of interventions do we need to provide for students. And so that's been our focus for September and October. We're going to kind of continue that too into November and December. Our 4th grade teachers are going to focus on their iReady data, and then also the wonderful resources that come with iReady, and looking at those tools and how can we use those tools to improve our iReady results. In January and February, we're going to continue on with that letters data and really look at our spelling and what kind of resources we can use to improve our spelling data. March and April will focus a lot on those number talks that I mentioned earlier and our mathematical practices. And then, of course, at the end of the year, we always do we tend to do a teacher survey, just, did we provide you with the support that you needed? And then reflect on our goals and kind of, revisit what we would like our focuses to be for the following school year. I do want to just mention that at the bottom of this graphic here, that our Keystone Standards, which I'm going to talk about next, and our assessments are kind of be embedded through the entire school year. So those conversations just happen as we're talking about these areas of focus that I have on this timeline. So these are our identified Mill Valley grade level Keystone Standards. And so, as you guys know, our district has a continuum where we have identified what the critical standards are for each, grade band of students. And so at Mill Valley, what we asked our teachers to do is, what are the keystones or the foundational standards that we want and the skills that we want kids to leave with at the end of each of these grade levels? What do we want kids to master? What do they need to know to really progress? And so we identified some keystone standards in each of the grade levels, which are listed up there, both in English language arts and in math. And those are going to kind of be standards that we continue to revisit throughout the school year. That, again, the goal being that at the end of this school year, these kids in kindergarten are mastered those Keystone Standards. That doesn't mean that we're not addressing the other standards. These are just the foundational skills that kids really need in order to really, move even through the continuum at all. So then that leads us also to the assessment piece of our focus at Mill Valley. And really, this is a conversation that we're kind of just beginning with teachers, but just empowering teachers to understand that there's a lot of different assessments at our fingertips that we can be examining in order to make really good instructional decisions for kids. We have our state data, which is good information to have, but we also have district vetted data that we have at our fingertips. But what I really want is my teachers to feel comfortable and confident with the classroom information that they get on a daily basis from students. There's a lot of information that they get from just observing students in the classroom and working with them in small groups. And I think teachers just, need to know that that information is really just as valuable as some of the other information that we have on the assessment triangle as well. And so we're going to do a lot of work on that this year. And then just identifying what exactly is high quality student data and what do we already have at our fingertips in order, again, to make sure that students are progressing and mastering the skills that we want them to. The second kind of part of my presentation is just that, I think it's really important that we focus on all of these things, but it's also really important that we celebrate student learning, that we are excited that when kids are mastering things, or we're excited when, a light bulb goes on for that kindergartner on a skill that we've been working on or one of the Keystone Standards that we've been focusing on. And so one way that we do that, if you want to advance to the next slide, is we really focus on the habits of mind at Mill Valley. And so our habits of mind are designed around innovate, collaborate, and inspire, which is not a new phrase for anybody here. That's very much aligned to our district mission and vision. But at Mill Valley, we have a Mill Valley mindset that the students say every morning. And it's designed around all of these things that are listed up here. And so you'll see we have some ideas or some kid-friendly language for kids to understand which each of those things are. So I've tasked the teachers this year because I really wanted us to get back to focusing on the habits of mind. Kids have had to be really resilient the last few years, and so I think focusing on this is a great time to do that. And so Innovate is what we're focusing on right now, and you'll notice under the Innovate category that encompasses exploring new thinking, trying new things, taking ownership of their learning, being able to invent something or design something or be creative. And so I've tasked the teachers with us focusing on one of these habits of mind every trimester, and so we're focusing on Innovate right now. And I've asked them to do a class project or do some sort of an activity or a display of some kind that encompasses Innovate. And so if you move to the next slide, I have a few examples of some of the things the teachers have done. And so when I say the staff, I mean everybody in the staff. So I've even, our special ed teachers, our unified arts teachers, everybody is on the same, frame of mind that we're all going to do something that is designed around Innovate. So our art teacher, Mrs. Caldwell, read the book The Dot with her art class, and it's all about making your mark and being creative. And so she had each of the students create their own dots, and they got to be as creative or innovative as they wanted to be with those, and we put those on display in the hallway. And if you want to go to the next slide. And then Mrs. White's second grade class read a story called Not a Box. And so this project was really cool, and I know this was something that the classroom teacher was very excited about. If you want to go to the next slide. She partnered with the Humane Society, and the Humane Society said that the cats and the dogs at the Humane Society really like to have boxes to play in. So she collected boxes and she put the students into groups and said, be as innovative and creative as you can and design like these play areas or these play boxes for these cats and the dogs. And the kids were so excited about it. And if you go to the next slide, we delivered them to the Humane Society. So this is an example of some of the boxes that they made. You'll look, if you see, there's like a little Tim Hortons that one of the kids made. But the cats and the dogs are loving them. The Humane Society was wonderful and took some pictures and sent them to the kids, so they were super excited about that. But it was such a great opportunity for us to be able to partner with a community organization, but also be able to let the kids encompass that habit of mind, which was Innovate. And that is it for me, unless there are any questions.
Sure. Thank you for that presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, but first I wanted to point out that our cats don't even need you to decorate the box. They're all over it. Can you remind me what a numbers talk is?
So it's just a way for students to apply their mathematical practices. So, it's basically talking through a word problem, but they do it in an interactive way where sometimes the teacher isn't even, really saying anything. She's giving clues, and the kids have to try to guess what number it is or what operation it is, depending on whatever the skill is they're working on.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you that every time I hear about things that are going on in the school districts, I'm always impressed with the degree of collaboration between the teachers and administrators in looking at and trying to analyze and figure out the kinds of things that they need to do to inspire and move kids forward in terms of their education. To see that level of collaboration then come down to, for example, I wrote down here the classroom assessments where the teachers have flexibility to use their own skills and talents, whatever strengths they have, to come up with ideas, ways of working with kids and so forth, and then to see it culminate in the creativity of the kids, the challenge of here's a box, make something out of it. And the kids have the freedom to explore their ideas, to be as creative as you pointed out, and then they get the joy of seeing the application of what they're doing. I'm being being in education during my life, I just constantly marvel at how creative and how exciting this process from the beginning right down to, you know, cats having boxes to play in can be. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I'm a little curious about the teacher-based team. So is this the first year, did you say, that you're doing that? Or?
So we've always done teacher-based team
Yeah.
meetings. I think Mrs. Savage and I just wanted more of an organized, structured approach to how we're going to approach those teacher-based because it's a very small amount of time.
Right.
You know, teachers we have to maximize their time. There's so much that's going on in the day, and so we wanted to make sure that when we get them into those meetings that we have a focus, we have an organized way to run them. They know coming into the meeting what it is we're going to be doing, what we're going to talk about. So we usually tell them ahead of time, you know, this is the data we're going to look at today, so make sure you bring this. Or today we're going to talk about, you know, what strategies we can use to help this particular data that we talked about the last time, so make sure you bring those things. So we've always had TBTs. This is just the implementation plan is a new way to approach those.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Just trying to maximize the
Yep.
collaboration
And time.
idea
Yep.
sharing, and right. Okay, I love that. Like overall, do you feel like you feel like you have the resources that you need to support your students and staff, and feel like you're all ready to go? And
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would tell you that Mill Valley's teachers are amazing, and, you know, whatever is, you know, we need to do to move kids and to make sure that kids are getting what they need, then I think it's a great collaborative effort all around in our building to just make sure that kids are getting what they need, and I think we have what we need because I think we have great teachers and we have great families, and I think that alone makes it easy for us to do our job. Yeah.
it seems like there's been a lot of really good professional development
Yes.
too. Really focused, and
Yeah.
so it's exciting.
I want to say thank you for the Keystone Standards. I love that idea and concept because especially coming out of this pandemic year, we don't actually totally know where everybody is, and that it's making that kind of going back and making sure those fundamental skills are in place for every kid, with not like separating those kids out and making them feel like they're behind. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
That's a really good point, Nan. I like that. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, thank
Do I have
you
to hit
so
this
much,
again?
and please thank your entire staff. Thank you, Ms. Savage. Really appreciate it. All right. Get back over here. Okay, we are now to our report section, starting out with Ms. Savage and a High Point report.
Good evening. November 19th through the 22nd and the 23rd are the sophomore experience days at Ohio High Point. So that's the chance for all the school districts that are serviced by High Point to come in, kind of look at the programs that are going on. Last night we had the 5-year forecast review for High Point, and based on their goals of building high-interest programs over the next 5 years, they're looking at adding heavy equipment, criminal justice, enhanced medical care certifications, paramedics, and fire programs at their home campus. Some may or may not, which come to our satellite campus. So just wanted to highlight also Sue and I had a meeting with the superintendent from High Point and the new assistant superintendent, and we had a chance to kind of go over all of the programs, specifically Marysville satellite program, and just gain some great insight as to the wonderful partnership we have with High Point and being able to provide the technical education here on our campus. So it was a great opportunity.
Yep, it's a great partnership for sure. Any questions of Nan? Okay, thank you. Superintendent's report, Ms. Allen.
I think I'll start with Jonathan and Ashley, if you guys want to head over this way. Jonathan is going to give you an update. We've talked at length about pay rates for different positions across the district and kind of the overall shortage, increasing pay rates of other school districts. So he's going to give you a little overview for an item that is up for consideration later in the agenda and allow you to ask some questions.
Good evening, everybody. Just again, a brief update on our substitute pay for our team members, again, who serve as substitutes in our school district. So if you can go to the next slide. There is a shortage of substitutes in our school district for various positions. Not only are we challenged with recruiting new members to our team, but also, too, we're starting to see a challenge of retaining our team members as well. So we are looking to make a recommendation to you this evening to be implemented starting on Monday, October 25th. So next slide. So again, it's a competitive market out there. As you can see, as you drive throughout Marysville and the surrounding areas, you're seeing for hire signs everywhere. So again, the job market is very fluid and there's a lot of options for people to make money. So again, we need to remain competitive. So for our substitute teachers, what we are recommending is currently going from a basic day rate of $100 to $125. And then if you're in the same assignment for 15 consecutive days or greater, you would jump up to 135, which is previously 110. And then just a slight adjustment to that consecutive day assignment piece would be, it's just for substitutes, team members in our district that serve 15 days consecutively, no matter what the assignment is. So they're staying with us. They're working day after day, and they're helping our kids in our district. So that would be a slight change as well. We did a lot of research before making this recommendation. So with schools that utilize the ESE of Central Ohio for substitutes, the average was approximately $123 for a daily basic rate. The highest for a basic day is $155, and the lowest is $92. So really that $125 is really that sweet spot to where it's a fiscally responsible decision, but yet, too, we're showing our substitute team members that we appreciate and value what they bring to our school district. Next slide. Substitute bus drivers. This is a challenge across the nation. And especially in our area, there's a very small pool of drivers who can be substitutes. So currently right now at $16 per hour, we're the lowest in our immediate area with surrounding districts. So we're definitely recommending increasing that hourly rate to $20 per hour. This is actually consistent with our step 0 base pay for a beginning bus driver. The difference, though, with our full-time drivers is that grows based on percentages increases. This will remain flat every year. Also, too, a new piece based on feedback that we've received from people wanting to become drivers is there's some intensive training that has to go into obtaining your CDL, close to 30 hours plus. And a lot of districts are stepping up and giving paid training. So we want to remain competitive in that very competitive market. So we want to offer a $500 stipend for paid training, but with the caveat of you won't receive that $500 stipend until you serve as a substitute for us for 20 instances. Because what we don't want to do is train people, pay them, and then they leave us to go work somewhere else. So again, we want to make sure we're getting a return on our investment. Next slide. And when we think about various classified substitute positions, again, a lot of research went into this, and some available data that was provided us from the ESC those are some average rates of pay that you'll see in regards to certain positions that are substitutes, with secretaries, a substitute aide, the custodial rate, etc. Some as high as $16.50, some as low as $11. So again, we're looking for that sweet spot to where it's fiscally responsible, yet we can remain competitive in the market. So we are recommending that we move to $14.50 an hour across the board for these various positions. Also, too, with the consistency, we won't be competing against ourselves with certain substitute positions to where some team members would be more willing to take on other responsibilities and other substitute roles because the pay is similar. So that's part of that recommendation as well. Next slide. Any questions?
Do you feel that, that this is going to, obviously paying more is going to help? Do you think, based on your experience, do you think that we are going to be competitive at these pay levels?
Well, time will tell, sir. Time will tell. I'm confident it's going to make a difference. Just the other week, we had 2 viable substitute bus aide candidates who wanted to join the team. But when it got down to the financial piece, they declined the offers just due to $10 per hour not being enough to supplement their income. Because a lot of our families, a lot of our team members that join, they're supplementing a regular income because they're working part-time for us. Some team members, this is their main financial gain in a way to provide for their family. So again, just recently, we had 2 bus aides. They were ready to go, but the financials weren't there. So we're confident this will help. How much? Only time will tell. And 2, just to remain competitive, because a lot of people are adjusting the rates, especially around the 270 loop.
Do you feel like are the majority of our substitutes directly in this community? You know, because I know I talked to some people who are like, well, I'd like to substitute in Marysville, but if they're paying a lot more in Dublin or somewhere in Columbus, I'm willing to make the drive. But if you make it a little bit closer, then they're like, okay, it may not have to be as high as the highest, but if it's higher, then it's kind of an encouragement to stay here.
Right, and we surveyed our substitute teachers that work mainly in our school district, and the feedback that we received was mainly people substitute in our district because of the relationships with the staff and the students.
Gotcha.
That's their main reason why they substitute in our school district.
Right.
But also, too, a part of that feedback is the rates are increasing, you know,
Right.
a little bit of a raise would be appropriate to remain competitive.
Gotcha.
How many substitute teachers a day do we use? Is there an average or?
I would have to look at specific numbers for you, Nan, and I can get back in contact with you with that for specifics.
So I know there's been some trouble with getting enough bus drivers, and then even substitute teachers, but the other substitutes on the list, have there been issues with that too lately, with substitute secretaries or whatnot?
Yes, especially with special education aides, building aides. We've been having a difficult time recruiting new people to join the team in that specific area. So we're hoping that's going to make a difference. And also, too, retaining the people that are currently serving in those important roles. So special education aides have especially been difficult to fill positions. Our substitute bus aides have been especially difficult. Substitute custodians go unfilled. Positions go unfilled more than they are filled. So it's a rarity where we fill a position for a substitute custodian. So we need to make a change in order to hopefully get a different result. Doing the same thing is not going to help.
I don't know if you know this or not, but so if we didn't get those substitutes, does that sometimes result in overtime pay?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, because certain functions, certain things must be accomplished.
Right.
So if we're not getting substitutes, like in a custodial role, some of our substitutes are working over and they are receiving overtime in order for the basics to be done.
Right.
So we're paying for it one way or the other,
Exactly. Yep.
so.
Okay.
And we don't want to burn out our custodians.
Right. Oh, definitely. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Langhouse.
All right, and then I asked Ashley to come and give us a virtual academy update.
Okay. So I wanted to give you an update on Marysville's virtual school. We have a few items to discuss since the last time I gave you an update. We did apply for an IRN through the Ohio Department of Education, so our K-12 experience can function as its own building. And that gives us some guidance that's a little more student-friendly for the virtual experience. Students are invited to engage in any state testing that happens during the school year. So we're coming up next week on the 3rd grade ELA test. And we will provide a testing site for those students, and one of our coaches is going to proctor that test. The same protocols will be put in place for our high school students in winter testing and then again in spring. Teachers and students are working diligently, actually. And we've gone through, obviously, 1 year of supporting students in a virtual landscape, and we've made some adjustments based on what we've learned. So our 612 students are again using the platform Apex, and they're supported by teachers in that content. And then our K-5 teachers are teaching and using the same instructional tools that our in-class teachers use to teach our students, which is a change from last year and a change that I think is a positive one. 2 of our teachers are actually placed in buildings and teaching virtually from our buildings so they can have access to our instructional coaches. And our instructional coaches have been really helpful in making sure that they have what they need. And then our PD is more on demand and not just during the PD times to allow them to have time to get used to the products that we use. So that's been a positive change that I think is making a difference this year. If you look down, we wanted to make sure that we were intentional around monitoring student engagement in accurate ways. So it's very difficult to teach in a virtual space, and our teachers do a phenomenal job, but we want to make sure that we're looking at what student engagement quality is. So our teachers are closely monitoring when students are on Zoom or not, and if they're making adequate progress in their learning activities that they do with the teacher and then independently. So that's reported to Principal Stackhouse weekly, and our teachers are using a system to make sure that we're keeping track of that. When anybody flags as maybe not engaging, we do reach out to the family and just say, how can we help you, or what is the situation? So we do have an absence email, so families can report if their student is sick, so that we don't bother them and we're aware that it's a true absence. However, we want to make sure that we're making earlier contact to just ensure that there's no technical difficulties, that they have what they need to be successful. And then if somebody does flag into a warning zone where attendance is becoming an issue, Mr. Stackhouse gets involved. And he's already working with 2 families who are kind of leaning into that, what we would call truancy window. But 2 out of 215 is pretty good. So if we go to the next slide, I will continue updating you, and this will kind of be the table that I continue using. So the top row gives you a grade level based enrollment. The green second row down, engagement rate, we'll talk about what percentage is our students engaged with, and do we have anyone flagging as maybe not engaged but not reported as absent. Once engagement reaches a place where they're not engaged, that will turn into an absence, and then I'll start including those attendance watches there for you. In our truancy, like I mentioned before, we have 2 students one in 10th grade and one in 11th grade, in which we've engaged our attendance officer to help create systems in which we can increase engagement. And then the bottom table is just an overall attendance picture that mimics how our buildings are designed in the district. So we have a total of 215 Marysville students engaged virtually. In our elementary space, that would be 45 students, a Creekview age student, there are 26, middle school 34, and high school 110. So our teachers do have their work cut out for them. And we're happy that this many families are taking advantage of a different platform in order to stay educationally engaged with us. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just was curious, just remind me the timing of if somebody wants to change from this platform.
Yeah.
When does that happen?
So last year, we worked with families on demand because it was such an unanticipated experience. This year, in order for the student to feel a sense of community and the teacher to feel equipped to bring that student in at a time that makes most sense for their learning, we're asking that inter-district transfers happen at the end of a trimester for our K-6 students or end of semester for our middle and high school students. If there are situations that extend, regular circumstances, they do work with Mr. Stackhouse, and then he works with us to make exceptions to that rule. But we're finding that those points of transition allow for us to make sure that we're transitioning records, we're getting the teacher acclimated, and then before the student starts, there's an orientation period where they pick up their Chromebook and have everything that they need in order to be successful from home. And that gives our coaches time to make sure those materials are provided and the parents have like an understanding of what the expectations are as far as our partnership is concerned.
I know that last year, one of the concerns and one of the situations that existed was there just was very difficult to make the connections and to build relationships with the families. And it looks like more of that is occurring. So is that accurate?
It is accurate. I think there's less independent learning happening at the lower grade levels where we relied on that a little more heavily last year. And we saw some literacy needs occur. And so we were trying to make sure that we're giving a similar experience that models after what we do in our classrooms. So that's a difference. We also have 2 seasoned teachers in the building. And their input from last year was very much important as far as just orienting students to the learning space. And then they do meetings during the day that are strictly around like, what does our day look like? And they'll have just fun activities that the students can have to just have a sense of togetherness. And that was directly from input provided from teachers who had had that experience last year. So do we have areas that we can get better? Of course. We'll always try to kind of roll with those adaptations as we go. I also think that it's important that students have a place for input with their teacher and families. So I think that those have been valuable pieces of feedback that we can have to make sure that that sense of belonging continues, because that's important to us as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if, maybe you can't answer this yet, is this something that's going to be part of education and part of our school district going forward forever? Or is this an option that's likely to grow maybe? Or are these families, is it more that they're going through something particular this year, coming out of last year? Can you tell any of that?
Yeah, I don't know what the future looks like for Marysville, but I think there's a push or a interest nationwide that we're a little more flexible with how we partner with families and educate. So do I think this will live on with some districts? I do. And I would think that, if families have interest in that, as we start surveying about interest in staying in Virtual Academy from trimester to trimester, or semester to semester, we might get a read for what their interest is long-term. And I would defer to Diane for any other input on that.
Yeah. I just was going to say, I appreciate the fact that you got that IRN. I think that's probably a good step. And then more importantly, I was really excited to hear about the fact that for that K-5 or K-6, that they're using the same kind of platform as is being taught in the classroom. So if they would decide to transition back into in-person, it's just going to be so much more smooth.
I agree.
So,
And
yeah.
you know, it's more work for teachers, but I think they see those impacts too. So it
Yeah.
provides motivation to keep doing that.
Thank you. Thank you for always staying focused on looking for ways to improve. Really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
that.
Thank you.
All right, I have a few other items, just, I know that I updated all of you, and we also sent a letter out to parents talking about the supply chain and how that's creating some demands in our food service department. So we're continuing to watch that. In particular, lunchroom trays, I know, were an issue. So just like everywhere, I think we're facing those shortages. Last Friday, our staff had the opportunity for booster clinic, as well as this past Tuesday, and we've offered other options through area pharmacies as well, if they're interested in doing that, and partnered with the health department and other school districts in the county for that. I would also say we are currently in the middle of 3 pretty significant projects that I've been giving updates on. So our enrollment study, maintaining our financial focus groups, and moving forward with our strategic direction. So all of those things are still in action. Enrollment, we are up 227 students from last school year. Currently, our enrollment is 5,361. And I think that's it.
I can't remember, but what's the timeline on that enrollment study? When do you think you're going to have
We believe we'll be
results?
able to share it in November,
Okay,
at the November board meeting.
okay. All right, any other questions of Diane? Okay, thank you. And now we move on to the treasurer report.
Okay, first thing I wanted to mention briefly is that for our fiscal year 20 audit, that was, I guess it's been complete for quite some time, but we just received the State Auditor Award for our fiscal 20 audit, so that's 4 consecutive years. That's good news, thank you. So then the bigger chunk of my report, though, is going to be our November 5-year forecast presentation. So you hit the next slide, please. So our first slide is a very high-level look at the 5-year forecast. This shows all the way back to actuals in fiscal year 19 out to projections to fiscal year 26. If you see the blue line is our revenues, red line is expenditures, and the green line is our ending cash balance. One thing I would point out, one thing that to me kind of artificially changes these numbers, in fiscal year 19, the expenditures were, again, like I say, artificially inflated due to the $2.2 million advance to the PI fund. So that shows up there as an expenditure, but then again, that's going to inflate the revenues in fiscal year 22 when that advance was repaid. So just want to point that out. As you can see, beginning in fiscal year 23, expenditures begin to exceed revenues. And I guess more importantly, the blue line overall is actually decreasing. So you're seeing that revenues in total in the general fund are actually starting to go down and actually to be going down in each year in a relatively slight decline. Obviously, when you have expenditures exceeding revenues, you start eating into your ending cash balance. You can see, obviously, this year we have a very healthy ending cash balance, but with those expenditures exceeding revenues, the number starts to go down, and you'll see in fiscal year 26, which is the last year of the 5-year forecast, we're currently showing a deficit. All right, the next one, please. Thank you. This slide
takes our numbers as they pertain to our cash balance policy. So there's two main criteria with the cash balance policy. The first being 1 month of expenditures compared to as an ending cash balance. And as I mentioned, in fiscal year 26, we would no longer meet that criteria of the cash balance policy. And the other criteria is expenditures exceeding revenues by 1%. And we actually are not meeting that criteria beginning in next fiscal year 23. And that's not this isn't news. That particular criteria we knew we were not going to be meeting in prior forecasts as well, which is why we've been having levy planning discussions for quite some time now. The next slide, please. We've talked about this in the past few years. When we look at our revenue sources, looking at local sources versus state, and the number just continues to kind of flip-flop, because in the past it was really, we were getting more on the state side than we were on the local. So it's changing. That's not because our local sources are increasing, although they are just slightly. It's more because our state sources are decreasing. So our local sources, which is our local real estate taxes, that makes up approximately 54% of general fund revenues, whereas state sources is making up approximately 46%. We talked last time where we were cut, our state foundation revenue was cut by about $1 million when the pandemic began. And so in our next slide, I want to talk a little, I guess, never mind, hold on one second. Sorry, I got ahead of myself there. I did want to talk on this slide about the new state funding formula. So the state legislature did approve a new funding formula, which is in effect for this school year and for next school year. Unfortunately, we really don't even know the exact impact of that yet, because typically in October, we receive our first settlement sheet that has the new funding formula applied. ODE has had trouble getting everything applied in a timely manner, so we're actually still kind of a little bit in the dark as to what it's going to look like, and we won't know until December what the actual numbers will be. So we're still, this forecast is still based on estimates. So I mean, I think, I still feel comfortable that we're pretty close, but at the same time, I think it could easily change in the low six figures once we actually see the real numbers in December. A couple different things that come with the formula. You know, we've talked in the past how open enrollment in and open enrollment out will no longer be separate items in the formula, as well as community school deductions. But right now, they're still showing up that way as expenditures. So what that really does to the forecast, and kind of makes it hard to make this match exactly, is right now, like for instance, open enrollment out, I'm still showing as an expenditure on the forecast in my cash flow. But once we get to December, it should go away, and we'll no longer actually see an expenditure. It just means that the total revenue will actually go down, because it kind of all go into the same pot. So just the main point being there that there's likely going to be a change, whether it be expenditures are going up or down, or revenues going up or down. In total, it should be relatively close. It just may flip-flop as where you're seeing it. Sorry, I hope that made more sense than it did in my head. The other thing that we don't know yet about the state funding formula is will we see an increase in state funding if we have an increase in students? So this year we increased by a little over 230 students. In previous years, that would have done nothing for our state funding because we would have been capped. And we don't know yet whether we'll see an increase per student for increase or not. So that's also another variable that could have an impact on the 5-year forecast. So this slide looks a little more detail at the local versus state funding. The light orange slide there is our local funding. And as you can see, it's relatively flat. We've talked in the past about House Bill 920, and the effect of that is basically that, so that as a homeowner when the value of your property increases due to inflation, you don't pay, your property taxes don't increase due to that inflation. That's why you have effective millage. So as the value of your property goes up, or the value of our property values in total of the district goes up, our millage goes down, so that we receive about the same amount of money. Property taxpayers pay about the same amount on property taxes. So that's why local revenue will be about the same throughout the forecast. Now, the red line is our state funding. I already mentioned that with the state funding formula, the state funding is going to be relatively flat. You may see in the news where the state is putting so much more money towards public education, which is a true statement, but that's in total. That doesn't mean that they're putting more towards Marysville schools, because we're not. It looks to be relatively flat. The main reason being the state looks at Marysville schools and looks at our community and sees us as relatively wealthy compared to other districts in the state, with two factors mainly being, one, property tax values, property values in the district, as well as median income of our residents. So as seeing us as relatively wealthy, they basically are saying, you can afford to pass more property taxes, we'll give you a little less on the state funding side. But the main reason you're seeing the red line actually go down is to the tangible personal property tax reimbursement payments. That began phasing out several years back. We're currently losing $600,000 per year due to that phase out until we get to fiscal year 26, when we'll receive $0 in that tangible personal property phase out. Just to put that in perspective, when we started receiving that phase out, the number we received was around $5.6 million. That began around fiscal year 16. That $5.6 million equates to, in today's money, approximately 6 mills. So in essence, once we get to fiscal year 26, it will be the equivalent to us losing 6 mills worth of a levy. The next slide, please. And again, since we're getting close to talking about levy time, I wanted to show this. I haven't shown this slide in a while because there really wasn't much to talk about with it, but it is worth reminding. At one point, the tangible personal property tax was a very significant revenue source for Marysville schools. We were receiving over $9 million, and you could see that it was increasing. And obviously, if this had never gone away, we may have not needed a levy any time into the future, but obviously that we can't do anything about that. But I do think it's also worth noting that since that was wiped out around 2005, and then it was kind of phased out through 2008, and I'll mention on our levy slide later on, the last new money levy we passed was in 2008. So even after that being wiped out, we've only passed one new money levy since the phase out of almost over $9 million of tangible personal property revenue. Okay, the next slide looks at the overall property values in the district. This was the same that we reported on back in May, so there was an overall increase of 2.25%. Obviously, for the last several years, property values for the residential side is increasing much faster than the commercial side. The next update, the county auditor update and values will be in 2022. Right now, in the forecast, I'm estimating a 4.1% increase at that time. That would be conservative if you look at where we've been the previous 3 and 6 years ago. But at the same time, it's definitely, I think it'll definitely be conservative when you're looking at residential, but what we don't know is what will happen with commercial. So I feel comfortable leaving it there with not knowing what commercial will do. But I guess the best case scenario, that number is wrong, and we would add, it would add some revenue to the forecast, not enough to really move the needle when you're talking about levies, but it would be significant revenues if that number were, say, 8%, as it was a few years ago. Looking at expenditures, the trend hasn't really changed much compared to previous forecasts. A couple things to note. The forecast assumes additions of 2 employees per year. As you know, we grew by over 230 students this year, so we actually added more than 2 employees this year. So if our enrollment study comes back and shows that we're going to have continued growth at that level, that would impact the forecast. I didn't really want to change it until we had more concrete data. So I just left it at the steady rate that it was. So that's another variable that could impact the forecast for May. Currently, our insurance benefits is the category that's growing the fastest. Each year of my projection, I'm assuming a 10% increase. I really wouldn't even call that worst case scenario because the previous 3 years we've been at or above 10%, with the highest being 13. So I mean, that it could be a lot worse because I know a lot of districts who have had 20 and 30. So at the same time, I can give a little bit of good news regarding our self-insurance fund. It's probably at the highest level that it's ever been since we've started it. So that's a good news. Looks like we're starting to trend in the right direction. And hopefully we'll actually be able to pay back that advance potentially next year. And there's also a good chance once we get to our January renewal that we could be less than that 10%, which again, that would actually be a positive change to the forecast. So as we're getting close to levy time, close to a new levy, we'll talk a little bit about levy history. As I mentioned, there was a new money issue back in '98. That was a 5 mil replace and a 4 mil new that was passed in 2008. Just to clarify, a replacement levy actually does generate new revenue compared to a renewal. So with a replacement levy, that's basically saying, you know, when we passed this levy 5 years ago, your house was valued at, let's say, $200,000. Now, due to inflation, it's valued at $230,000. We want to apply that same millage to the 230 instead of just the 200 like it would be with the renewal. So that replacement levy back in 2008 did generate some new revenue as well as that 4 new mills. Then in 2013, those were renewed into a continuing levy, and that was, so again, a renewal does not generate new revenue. As I mentioned, since prior to 2008, the previous new money levy was 1998, so that's 10 years prior. With our current timeline, we're looking to be approximately 14 to 15 years between levies. You may remember back in 2018, we had a 6.56 mil renewal levy. Again, no new money with that, along with the no new millage PI levy. I would note that all of our current levies are continuing levies, which is a good thing because we're not going back to the ballot all the time and creating levy fatigue. But at the same time, those continuing levies do not grow significantly. We're only really seeing significant growth on new construction. So currently, we're looking at levy options, as I mentioned. Diane, Kenny, and myself are doing levy focus groups where we're meeting with various sectors of the community. I think we've had maybe 4 meetings so far. We've got another 3 or so to go. With those committees, we are presenting options. We're giving an overview of our financials and basically saying we're showing a deficit and we've got to do something about that. So here's a few options. One of the options we present is a property tax. Another option we present would be a school district income tax. And a third option we present would be budget reductions. So as we continue those meetings and finish those up here in the next couple weeks, those will help guide the decision-making process, and we'll be coming back at some point after that with a recommendation.
Todd, you mentioned spending reductions. Could you give us an idea of what that might look like?
Yeah, So first off, I would say when we're presenting that in our focus group, it is a purely hypothetical. You know, there's no list or, list of names or programs that we're talking about. We're only talking dollar amounts at this point. But obviously, from a financial standpoint, we can look and say, well, here's the deficit that is at the end of the 5-year forecast. And then at the same time, we could say, well, that's how much we need to cut to make that deficit go away. So in a school district where over 85% of our expenditures is salaries and benefits, that's where you're really going to be able to move the needle to get that deficit to go away. We could say, well, we're going to do a 10% cut in building budgets and supplies. That would save some money, but really not enough to make a big difference. So most of those cuts would come in the form of staff. One reason that I personally wouldn't be in favor of that option would be, as we mentioned, we're starting to grow. So we grew by 230 some students this year. So if that were to continue, or if you just look at, if we had said this year we're not hiring any staff. Well, really by hiring no staff when you're growing, that's the same as a cut already. So if we look at actually making staff cuts while we're growing, it's kind of a double-edged sword, or the impact is kind of doubled. Next slide, please. So this slide, I gave you the handout in case it was hard to read on here. This is just, as we're talking about the levy time coming up, this just gives you some facts and figures for comparison's sake, looking at our levy rates compared to other districts in Central Ohio. As you can see there, we're the third lowest tax rate. It does take into account real estate tax as well as the school districts that have income tax. As you can see, a lot of the districts that are surrounding us do have the income tax, and those with the income tax obviously have a much lower property tax rate. Also, I included on there the state report card results, which again show very strong results for Marysville schools. And that's it, unless there's any other questions.
I guess the one other comment I wanted to make is that you did have a finance committee meeting as well. And I always appreciate a lot of the members, all the members on that committee have been serving for, I think, as long as I've been on the board. And so it's just a really nice group of people who have a pretty darn good understanding of school finance. And I thought they were very appreciative of you sharing that, and kind of had a 50-50 reaction to the income tax versus property tax, but some really good conversation too, just about the reality of both of them and who pays more and what do you need to think about, and as you're growing, what are some of the opportunities. So there was some really good discussion there, and so I look forward to hearing what a lot of the focus groups have to say. But I also, in 2018, when we did have that, and it talked about the last new money levy passed was in 2008, and the next new money levy is not currently projected until 2022 if the levy renewal passes, and I guess my comment was just complimenting the work that you've done and really the partnership between you and Diane to really maximize the district's resources and to be able to have this almost 15-year span of no new money when you have losses in state funding. I mean, that's just an amazing feat, I think, and something that our community needs to be aware of and should really be grateful for, because then you look at our tax rates being the third lowest in the area. So
right.
That's pretty amazing.
Hey, Todd,
data.
can you just confirm, what is the total millage being collected?
Total, so the numbers that you'll see on there, those are probably about a year older than I could give you, because to get every district I needed to go into the Ohio Department of Taxation. So the number for Marysville is actually a little lower than the number you see there, which it shows 34.7. So I think the number is actually, if I remember right, it's closer to 33.
Okay.
33 mills total. But for operating standpoint, the general fund, that number is closer to, I believe it's 24 point some mills on the general fund side.
Okay, there's a minimum number that's
Yeah, so-
required by state to collect, correct?
So the minimum number by state law is 20 mills, which they call the 20 mill floor. And so we're actually relatively close to hitting that 20 mills. And as we talked about that with House Bill 920, each year that our property values goes up, that millage number rolls down. So that number just a couple years ago, we were at, say, 26 point something. Now we're down to 24 point something. So within the next, say, 5 to 6 years, there would be a chance that we would actually hit that 20 mil floor if we did not add additional levy millage. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Nope. Okay.
Yeah, just if I could, between the 24 mills for operating and the 33 mills, which our district is collecting, that millage would be going to the PI fund and for bonds.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And I know our bonds, we're making progress on getting those. Where are we in terms of our bond?
I should have brought my
payoff?
levy sheet with me.
Yeah.
So our bond millage, we're collecting at around seven mills. Our bonds will be fully paid off in 2029. So at that point, when bonds are paid off, the millage goes away, which I don't want to put that hope out there that that's going to go away and everybody's going to be out scot-free. So our plan and what we've been planning for the last few years is at that time, when that bond millage goes away, we would like, because as we've said, we think that we're growing, we think that we're going to need new buildings at some point. If we were able to push off the need for new buildings all the way out to 2029, we would be able to do a no new millage bond issue. And in essence, we would be saying, well, there's 7 mills there, that's going to go away. You are already paying that, so can you just keep paying that same millage so that we can use a couple mills to build a building? Building a building is really the easy part. It's staffing the building that brings in the larger part. So, for instance, let's say it costs an additional 3 or 3.5 mills to staff that building. We could still potentially build a building and staff it with no new millage levies because of that the bond issues falling off. So that's been a goal and something we've talked about for several years. I guess the growth that we saw this year kind of makes us worry whether we would actually be able to make it out to 2029. But that's a discussion and planning that we're actually doing right now. And we're going to be starting some facilities committees to be looking at that and also possibly making some recommendations soon.
And I know we have done some refinancing of those bonds in the past, and I can't remember if we've, if we don't have any more opportunities to do that or not.
Yeah, so I think at the highest point, our bonds collected at 9 point some mills. So now we're down to around 7. So you can see that number's going down. 2 reasons. One, whenever there's an opportunity to refinance, kind of like when you can refinance your house and save some money on interest. It's different but similar, so we've done that multiple times. Also, with the inflation on property values, that number goes down. I believe we're probably going to have an opportunity to refinance some bonds again in, it's either 1 or 2 years. I'm not sure. That's something that we do plan for, so we've got that on the horizon, so that's likely to be coming soon.
Okay, good. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Nope. Okay, next up for my report, I wanted to start with student achievement. And as you know, we've learned and talked about the role of school boards on student achievement. There's been a variety of studies that link effective school boards with positive student achievement. So I am very proud and excited to announce that our board has earned the OSBA Boards of Distinction Award. And this award was created in 2019, and boards could begin earning points in 2020. Points are tracked over a 2-year period, This award is the first to recognize an entire school board rather than individual members. There are mandatory activities that each board member must complete and additional optional activities that earn points towards the award. A total of 600 points must be earned over the 2-year period, with each board member earning at least 100 points. I submitted our application on September 14th, and as a board, we had earned 760 points. We're going to be recognized at the Capitol Conference on Sunday, November 7th, and we will be one of 2 boards in the entire state of Ohio to have earned this recognition. So obviously, I could not be more proud of our board. I'm really grateful to serve with people who represent such a wide variety of experiences and beliefs. They treat each other respectfully, feel like we listen with the goal of understanding, not always agreeing, but understanding. And we're lifelong learners, but most importantly, even during a challenging past year and a half, we kept our focus on our district's strategic plan by supporting student achievement, fiscal stability, safety, and community partnerships. So congratulations, and thank you to all of you for all of the time and effort that went into achieving this award. I think our district is going to benefit and has benefited from just everybody's dedication to being a good board member. So thank you again. Next, let's see. Also, OSBA, they just have so many things that they offer for school boards as far as professional development, and one of them is a book club. The most recent book was Stepping Forward, and did you read that, Nan? Okay, you haven't I know you have it. I haven't read it either, but I get the emails that they send that kind of share discussion points and thought questions, and I thought the ones for this book were really timely. Some of the comments that they made that they took away from this book were be more intentional, come to meetings with their hearts and minds wide open, work to find common ground and common goals. And they said, you know, the less we truly hear one another, the more the volume gets turned up and rage and hatred emerge. And when I read those comments, I thought, you know, what a great reminder to all of us adults and role models for being role models for our children and grandchildren. So, you know, if we're really serious about addressing bullying in our schools, for example, it's just important that as adults we model acceptable behavior both in person and online. You know, you can respectfully disagree with somebody without name calling, and I feel like we've had some really good community coffees where we've had people with very different opinions about things, and we've ended up, I think, with great conversations and maybe different perspectives ourselves about different things. So, you know, when it comes to education, I truly believe that we all want the best for our kids and that we can pull together and work towards that goal. So just wanted to share that, which kind of leads into the community coffee. Before we talk about the one that we just had last week, I thought it would be great for people to hear that the community coffee in September, we had a couple of people show up with questions and suggestions about doing different things. And it's really nice. We're updated, and we know that there have been some follow-up conversations and meetings that have been taking place. One of them was to encourage better live stream coverage of the band's halftime performance and looking into other live stream opportunities. And then another one was to discussing ways to increase the use of compostable and recyclable materials. So I really appreciate our staff working with those people that came to the coffee to help some of those things become a reality. So our last coffee was this past Saturday, and I don't know, I think Mr. Smith and Ms. Savage were there. I know Brian and I were out of town, but any updates from that need to be shared with the board?
We had a gentleman that came to the coffee, and he was really looking for information about the school district. They've lived in Marysville, but their older daughter attended a different school, and their son has started in the school district, and kind of just trying to understand a little bit about personalized learning.
Right.
What does that mean? What does that look like? A little bit about the early college, high school, a lot about the career pathways available. It was an excellent talk. He had a lot of questions.
Good.
And but it was a good conversation.
Excellent. Just make sure you get those names and sign them up for volunteer opportunities, right? We're going to have our last coffee of 2021 will be on November 13th. And as always, they're being held at the Marysville Public Library, and if the weather's nice, they'll be out by the green chairs. And if the weather does not cooperate, they're just right inside, it's just right inside the front door there, in a little snack area, I think, something like that. Couple of updates on the Chamber of Commerce. They have 2 events coming up next week. They've got their Joint Business Association meeting at Der Dutchman on October 27th. That's a morning meeting. I think registration starts at 7:30 and the program starts at 8. It's a really nice opportunity to learn about area businesses, get contact information for potential internship opportunities, or just thank the businesses that we've already partnered with in our district. And then October 28th, there's a business impact breakfast on the diversity of crops in Union County. And again, the business impact breakfasts are free, and I believe this one is at Union Rural Electric, so if you're interested in attending, just go to their website and register. Finally, Capital Conference, again, will be held November 7th through the 9th. And then I think you should have also received an email about ED 411. That's the Economic Development Seminar that's been held at Ohio State over in the past. And I think last year they did a virtual event, and they're holding another virtual event this year on December 3rd. So again, if you're interested, mark your calendars and get registered for that. That is it for my report. So we'll move on to the legislative report. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I listed a number of things. Some of these you have received in communication from OSBA, and I just kind of tried to highlight those things to recall them to your memory. Couple of things. One, in terms of the House passed a continuing resolution that would invalidate some proposed amendments from the Ohio Administrative Code. And basically a recommendation from a review committee wanted to change a number of offerings in school. The elimination of the requirement that schools offer those subject areas runs counter to the overall goal of the state trying to make sure that kids are prepared for the workforce and have an opportunity to develop the workforce. So the House voted to repeal or invalidate those proposed amendments. The Senate, I would expect to follow suit. Couple of other bills that are brought forward. HB 334 would allow us to have a higher per meeting salary. It would go from $125 to $200. One of local interest is Senate Bill 166 that our state senator proposed. Essentially, it provides some support for career tech development by creating incentives, financial incentives, for businesses to work with school districts to provide career technical opportunities for students. Moving down, the House Finance Committee has House Bill 290, which will be in the news as the backpack bill. This bill would expand dramatically the number of students that would qualify for a voucher under the state programs and allow that voucher to go into an educational savings account. Now, putting it in an educational savings account gives the account owner lots of latitude as to how they spend that money. It is, the expansion would be a financial windfall for private schools, religious schools, those kinds of things. The proposal says that the scholarships would be 55 $150 for elementary students, and $7,500 for middle and high school students. In comparison, I think, and Todd, correct me on this, we're supposed to get $6,200 per student, but we actually get less than that. A little under 4,000. So these scholarships would be thousands of dollars more per student than what this public school system is receiving. So that no action has really been taken place. There haven't been any hearings on that. That's certainly something to keep on our vision. So, and then I've listed some other things that were recently introduced. So that's my report.
Thank you very much. Any questions of Mr. Smith? All right, moving on. Just a second here. We would have the Safety and Drug Committee report. Ms. Powers?
We will not have a meeting until this next Monday.
Okay.
We're on every other month still.
Gotcha. Next month. Okay, thank you. I would now accept a motion to approve the draft minutes from our September 16th, 2021 regular meeting. Motion by Ms. Powers.
Second.
Second by Ms. Savage. Any corrections or comments about the minutes? Okay, then roll call, please.
Ms. Powers? Yes. Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Mr. Root?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, motion carries. Next, I would accept a motion to approve the superintendent's recommendation for masking strategy starting October 25th. Motion by Ms. Powers,
Second.
second by Mr. Smith. Discussion, comments, any other questions? I guess since I did bring up that whole operational thing, could you maybe talk a little bit more about what your thought process is there?
Sorry. We had talked quite a bit about that 6% metric that we were reporting, but not every building has the same capacity, staffing-wise in particular. So what we decided, it's probably more effective for the principal and I to communicate. So there would be warning signs still in place for parents. You know, we're getting to a critical level, and then moving into that mask mandate or some strategy based on that experience. So it could be a classroom, or it could be the entire building based on our ability to maintain school at that time. And we've definitely seen the different impact in different buildings, even with a mask mandate. I think Edgewood was at maybe 4 or 5% the other day, or last week, maybe week before. So we'll just continue to move that direction, but it really makes it more flexible and personalized for the building.
I think one of the things that we've tried to do and that we've shown over the last year is that we can pay attention to what's happening, pay attention to how the decisions we've made are playing out, and make changes if that's necessary, make changes quickly. In fact, we did that at the beginning of the school year quite quickly. And that's part of how I interpret operational decisions, principal and superintendent. We're not going to stop paying attention. Dr. Orsina mentioned that the numbers are going down in the community here in Ohio, and I think in the US as well, but they're still somewhat high, and we're not going to assume that there's not going to be another problematic surge. We're going to pay attention and make changes, and make quick changes if we need to. Is that everybody's understanding?
That's my understanding. I mean, I know we're always, we're just a phone call away. So, I mean, or, scheduling, if we need to schedule special meetings, it's not something that we can do super easily sometimes, just given everybody's schedule, but we're certainly willing to do that, and we're definitely going to be continuing to watch this. I guess I'm a little curious about how, if those health department guidelines would change, if they would have come out changed today or tomorrow, like how does that impact your feelings about this masking strategy?
Well, I guess, you know, in the survey that was done, the survey reflected some of the studies, if I'm correct in this, reflected some of the studies that were being done in various school districts around the state. And, you know, not knowing what might happen, I think they would be looking at those studies and making some assumptions based on the results that those districts had. I know, you know, when we started the school year, we were in a pretty good shape. I think everybody felt at least some degree of comfort that we could start with mask optional. And we found that the circumstances changed dramatically. And so, in my mind, it took a dramatic action in order to try to get control of things. I would remind everyone that the goal has always been to have students in class 5 days a week. Last year, when we were in the hybrid system, that was the one thing that we heard consistently all year from parents was, please do whatever you can to get our kids in school 5 days a week. And with the experience that we had academically last year, which is not satisfactory to anybody, we know that having kids in school 5 days a week this year is even more important in order that we can begin to assess those kinds of things. I'm pleased at a couple of things. One, we saw that the total attendance, you know, whether it was a COVID experience or a non-COVID experience, about 6% of our students every day are missing from our buildings in some way. So the masks may or may not be making a huge difference in terms of the attendance in school. And based on the data that we've got. Our experience within the district is that we're now in kind of a moderate range, and a range where last year we made some significant changes in going back to out of the hybrid system to 4 days a week, and then on to 5 days a week. And at the beginning of this year, beginning with the mask optional. So we're back to a place where in the past we've been pretty comfortable with not having a mandatory mask situation. I asked a question about athletics because we're not requiring our athletes to wear masks, and some thoughtful provisions, some thoughtful actions on the part of the coaches has, created, from what I understand, a minimal impact among the extracurriculars, marching band, athletic teams. We've got plays and musicals and things that are coming up. So, I see a lot of real positive things. I know that, numbers here and numbers there and statewide and so forth, but, I've always said, I want to see what's happening in our district. I'm going to try to make decisions based on what's going on in our schools and try to get our kids in class in the least restrictive format that we can. And so I see some things that I think are positive in that direction.
Thank you.
I said earlier I wasn't sure of the county that did test to stay, and it's Warren County. It just was
Okay.
escaping me, but I had Kim look it up for me.
Okay.
So I'm feeling a little bit conflicted. With 55% of the parents indicating that they'd like to keep the mask mandate in place. On the other hand, I really am in favor of parental choice in that matter. I really hope that families keep in mind when they're making the decision for their family that, and I said this last year, I said, I want to make sure the kids have a prom and a graduation, and kind of the same thing this year. We're headed into the, football playoffs, kind of once in a lifetime opportunity for the football team, the cheerleaders, the band, and actually the whole student body. So that's kind of a key event that I don't want anyone to miss. However, at the same time, seem to be peaking in where we stand on this. So, again, just feeling a little bit conflicted on.
I understand completely, And I kind of feel like that, again, going back to at the beginning of the school year, parents didn't really understand the whole quarantine thing because, at least in my experience, until you actually have to live it, maybe you've read it, maybe people have told you, but until you have to live it, all of a sudden it's like, oh, now I get it. Yeah, I probably should have been wearing a mask, then I would still be able to stay in school. And I feel like our teams, our extracurriculars have really talked to their kids about, this is your choice, but if you want to be able to be on the field on Friday night or be competing on, with the band on the weekend or something, you might want to consider having that mask on because we know that it spreads rapidly out there and you may not get real sick, but you want to still be able to participate. So I do feel like there's a lot more knowledge out there and understanding with the parents, so that helps me. And then the other thing is, with all those cases that we've had, I was talking to a parent the other day and she said, my kids all had it. So would you consider making it optional for people who have already had it? I said, well, that's a consideration, but I think you can still maybe get it again, and who knows, But so at the end of the day, I feel like I can feel comfortable making this choice, knowing that parents do have a little better understanding of what the options are and what the consequences are of their actions.
I did have one question. I know that, and I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, Mark, but if I understood correctly, the second choice of both those that wanted to continue the mask mandate and those that wanted to eliminate the mask mandate were both to have a mask optional with some sort of return or testing element. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And do you have a guesstimate as to what the agreement, the degree of agreement between those two on that second option might be?
It would be all those 700 households combined.
Okay, and out of 1,100, if 700 fell in there, again, you're,
That'd be some kind of appetite for a
yeah,
masking optional situation with some form of mitigation
yeah,
strategy, whether it's a mask to return or a testing strategy.
right. And we do have testing available, but that's a matter of parental choice.
We do. We have plenty of tests available in each building, and it's a fairly simple process. Parents can pick it up. There's an app. You follow the directions. You can do it right at home, and it is very simple. So we have that available. Again, all of those pieces would include the fact that students remain asymptomatic. We don't want to forget that. We do anticipate a change at the health department. I do not want to make guesses at what that might be. You know, certainly lots of versions have circulated, but what comes out is still what will come out is still unknown. So in this case, I think we are aligned to the health department. The health department's recommendation is to highly recommend masks in indoor settings. You know, in my opening, that's exactly the same position I'm in. I still think it's highly recommended that you wear it when you come to school.
And you've shared your recommendation with Dr. Orsina as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was very comfortable with that, as long as we were monitoring and willing to make a shift if one would arise, just like he was at the beginning of the year.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, roll call, please.
Ms. Powers?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes?
Mr. Luke?
Yes.
Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Ms. Devine?
Yes, motion carries. Next on our agenda, I would accept a motion to approve the treasure items.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Powers,
Second.
second by Ms. Savage. Go ahead, Ms. Mia.
Just the usual items. The only thing I would highlight on there, Diane mentioned earlier, the supply chain issues causing increase in cost. So you're going to see on the appropriations adjustment a large increase in the food service fund budget, which is directly related to those increased costs for finding supplies.
Okay. Any questions for Todd? Okay, roll call, please.
Ms. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Mr. Luke?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes?
Ms. Devine?
Yes, motion carries. Next, I would accept a motion to approve Aaron Allen as volunteer for athletics.
So moved?
Motion by Mr. Smith. Second by Ms. Powers. Any questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Mr. Smith?
Yes?
Ms. Powers?
Yes.
Mr. Luke?
Yes.
Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Ms. Devine?
Yes, motion carries. I would now accept a motion to approve a stipend for the adolescent literacy PD cohort paid by the literacy grant to Lauren Devine.
So moved?
Motion by Mr. Smith,
Second.
second by Ms. Savage. Any questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Mr. Smith?
Yes?
Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Mr. Luke?
Yes.
Ms. Powers?
Yes.
Ms. Devine?
Abstain, motion carries. I would now accept a motion to approve Amber Powers at Marysville High School for tutoring stipend for a variety of mentor positions. She's mentoring 3 individuals.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Savage,
Second?
second by Mr. Smith. Questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes?
Mr. Luke?
Yes.
Ms. Powers?
Abstain.
Ms. Devine?
Yes, motion carries. All right, now I would accept a motion to approve the superintendent items.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Powers,
Second.
second by Ms. Savage. Diane.
Some things I want to highlight that Kathy McInnes is serving as the interim principal at Naven Elementary in Miss Lewis's absence with the illness. So we're unsure at this point how long that will remain, but Kathy assures me she will keep everything together.
I think she might have too much fun there, if you want to know the truth.
We're excited about that, but we definitely want to keep Mrs. Lewis in our thoughts and as she is in recovery.
Definitely.
Also wanted to note, we had a retirement for Crystal Robb at the middle school. We also have the increases that Jonathan shared with you. Supplementals, we have a long list of first read policies. most of those, well, I would say all of those, are to align with Ohio Revised Code, as well as provide clarity and a little more certainty in some of those comments. We had several overnight trips as well.
I would note that we actually have 2 retirements,
Yes,
okay?
Did I overlook one?
yes.
Yeah, Ann Roush from.
Oh, yes, she was on there as
Yeah,
well.
well, it says resignation first on the left, so I think
Right.
that's
Right.
why you didn't see the retirement.
So, correct, so we wish them both well, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, can't remember how long, well, we recognize them at the end of the year, so Ann's been in the district for quite a while, I think, so. Any questions for Diane? Comments about the policies? Like you said, there's quite a few policies in there. I know there was one that was specific to our board too, because we have a policy, what is it, BBAE, that's our governance team operating protocol. So that was updated to reflect our recently approved protocol. But yeah, all the other ones, it's mainly just in alignment with updates in law.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment, that there's nothing, there are a couple of new ones in here, but the vast majority of them are just language clarifications, so.
I guess I would also just comment again that, it's the approval of all of the substitute pay increases, and, thanking Mr. Langhouse for doing that research and helping to put this recommendation forward. So we'll be interested to hear if you see a change, in the level of interest and the ability to get some more substitutes, so. Any other questions?
No, I'd like to highlight that our FFA is going to participate in a leadership conference. I know that they do a number of things. It's a great program, and this opportunity is just one of many that students in FFA have. Also, show choir taking a trip to Massachusetts and participating in a festival there, which is going to be an amazing experience for those students. So glad that those opportunities are available.
Yeah, good point.
Actually, I wanted to say also that I was very happy to see the large number of volunteers beginning to pop on the list. We are blessed by a huge number of people that volunteer and help in our schools and with different activities.
All right. Thank you. Then accept a roll call now, please.
Yes.
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 Yes, motion carries. Comments and questions from board members. Mr. Luke?
I thought we covered a lot this meeting, but it was all important stuff, very efficient, lots of good information for us. Thank you to everybody who contributed to that. I believe we have an election coming up before our next meeting, and there are, if I got this right, there are 3 school board seats open and 6 people running. My seat is one of them that's open. I'm not running again. Usually when a public official steps back, it's to spend more time with their family. That's not my reason. I spend plenty of time with my family. But even though I'm not running again, I'm following the race with great interest, and I encourage other people to do so as well.
Thank you, Mr. Luke. Ms. Savage?
Thank you for all the presentations. Really appreciate it. Very, very informative. I just want to do a special shout out to Kathy McInnes. She's quite the wonder, and I really appreciate her stepping in to take over that role in an emergency situation. Wanted to address a particular issue that's been brought up several times, and that I had the administration go through and do a thorough check in regard to critical race theory. It's been a hot topic of discussion, and specifically the 1619 project. And I'm stating publicly that Marysville Schools does not use any part of the 1619 curriculum. Even though there may be materials available on the Ohio Department of Education website, Marysville Schools does not teach critical race theory nor the 1619 project.
Thank you, Nan. Mr. Smith?
Raymond Elementary had a fall festival for the students and family, and it was a huge success. It's an annual event and always well attended. The community of the Raymond School come together and they really enjoy spending time together. I'd like to recognize our student cheer section, the Pit. We got a note from a parent that following an away game, the leadership of the Pit went through and picked up all of the trash, debris, everything that was there, and made sure that the area was as clean as at the end of the game as it was at the beginning of the game. The amount of enthusiasm that they generate is just incredible. They won an award for being one of the best or the best student cheer sections in the state of Ohio. And if anybody has an opportunity to come and see, I don't know how many kids, 300, 400, or, you know, maybe more than that, they have a great time. They are amazingly respectful, and they conduct themselves in a manner that is really a positive reflection on our school district, on the parents, and on our community. I also, I mean, every time we have a board meeting, presentations are always thoughtful, they're thorough, they provide the information that we need in order to be able to make decisions and to have confidence in the decisions that we make. So again, to all of the administrators here and those that are not here that all contributed to those presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Powers?
Great presentations tonight. Really thankful that the numbers are down. Thank you, Diane, for bringing the parents back involved, the community involved again to make decisions with all of us as a group. I think that's a great thing. Shout out to the football team for winning the OCC championship 2 years in a row now. And on to the playoffs we go. So I just want to thank everybody for the amount of work that goes involved with getting us ready for these meetings and all the data and everything. It's wonderful and it helps and makes our jobs much easier.
Yes, it does. Okay. Todd, do you have any comments?
Sure, I just would congratulate the board on receiving the Boards of Distinction Award, and just noting that I understand the time extra time that you have to put on and to get that, you know, above and beyond the time you're already putting in as a board member. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Diane?
Especially after a 4-hour meeting, right? So I had a couple clarifying points that I just wanted to I did mention in my presentation that we are no longer calling to notify of a close contact. We have never notified a kid is quarantined. That's not our job. House Bill 244 went into effect mid-month and basically said that school districts can't treat vaccinated students different than unvaccinated students. Well, when we were calling to tell parents they were close contact, they were volunteering to us that they were vaccinated and wanted a different situation. So we have changed our procedure. We were doing that as a heads up to families just to turn everything over to the health department for them to give the quarantine notice, and we are no longer making the close contact phone call. It's probably a matter of semantics, but it's important semantics that I want to make sure it is definitely clear in this conversation.
Quick question on that. Do you know if that is, I mean, does the health department have the manpower to take over that? I mean, is that a pretty big job?
It's been a pretty quick turnaround.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Same
good.
day, typically.
Okay, good.
The other thing I just wanted to note, I know several celebrations, and I appreciate that, but I also just wanted to note that we did have a tragedy, a crisis take place at Impact Stadium, and while I don't want to necessarily dwell on that, I do want to celebrate the community and the medical professionals that just went above and beyond to provide care, and the response of our team and the response of students. And I don't think I've ever been in an event where the celebration was so high and the tragedy became so low. And the fact that people responded to direction really made, and I know that sounds a little funny, but it really made things easier for all of us trying to ensure the safest environment that we could. And so I just want to thank anyone and everyone, because I'm sure there's people we have left off the list, for jumping in and doing amazing things to benefit and support our coach, as well as that situation. So, thank you.
Thank you for making that comment.
Also, Sue, I have one more comment, because
Sure.
I just got this over email not too long ago, that the FFA fruit sale has begun.
Thank you, yes.
Yes,
That is
so
true.
now I'm really involved in that, because I have a granddaughter who Mr. Keck fondly has
Yes.
nurtured through the FFA, so I'm all involved in that now
Okay,
and
good.
keep up with that. so.
Thank you for reminding me. I know, because I have that on my phone calendar to make sure I don't forget to order, but I forgot to put it on my notes, so thank you. That's why we're a team, right? I just wanted to also congratulate the fiscal department again for their state auditor's award. I don't know how many years you've gotten it in a row, but that's a good trend. Thank you. Also, I believe this is National School Bus Safety Week. And I think October is National School Bus Safety Month. So just wanted to thank all of our transportation department staff. We really appreciate everything they do for our students. We know they're the first ones to see them in the morning, the last ones to see them at night, and they also do a great job with all of our extracurricular activities. And we know we recognized Rick Spence earlier this year, and I think he represents that entire group of employees there. They're great employees, so thank you so much. Continued good luck to all of our all sports teams. Go Monarchs. And I think I also want to appreciate Kathy McInnes and really how everybody has worked together, because I know before Kathy has been moved into this position, we've had other administrators juggling their jobs and all of a sudden becoming a principal at an elementary school and, kind of not even batting an eyelash. I don't know that anybody could tell that they were doing that, but we know that you did that, and we really appreciate your willingness, everybody's willingness to jump in there and help out. So, and our best to Lynette. We hope to see her back here soon. With that, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Powers.
Second.
Second by Mr. Smith. Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes, motion carries. We are adjourned at 9:07. Thank you.